This is Audible.
Fangs for Nothing. The Vampire Detective Book 1. Written by Arizona Tape and Laura Greenwood. Narrated by Susan Greenway. Chapter 1. I grabbed the phone from the cradle, already cursing myself for installing it. If I'd just left it as me having a mobile, I could have decided to ignore the call instead. But no. I had a landline phone, like some kind of ancient. Good afternoon, Lucy's PI service, how can I help? Hopefully, this wasn't another prank call. I'd been getting a lot of those. Apparently, people didn't take private investigators seriously. If I'd have known that, maybe I'd have chosen a different profession. Oh, who was I kidding? I'd still have gone with this one, and everyone knew it. Lucinda? William's voice replied. I rolled my eyes. And here was me thinking I was going to have some peace this week. Hello, William. How can I help you? Are you coming home soon? No, I thought for a moment. And no to your next question, too. He chuckled down the line. How do you ever know what my next question is? He asked. Because it's always the same. You ask if I'm going to come home, and then you ask if I'm ready to marry you yet. It wasn't even that I didn't want to marry him. I did. We might have been engaged by our parents, but William and I had known each other for over 100 years. I liked him a lot. I'd maybe even go as far as saying I loved him. You're not still mad about... You were a year late in your proposal, William. How do you think the others would have reacted if I'd said yes? Vampires come of age at 25. That was when William was supposed to have proposed. And yet he didn't for another year. That was nearly 100 years ago. And I might take another 100 years to forgive you for it still, I warned him. He sighed. Fine. I could hear the resignation in his voice and almost caved. But no, I couldn't do that. That would imply that I was ready to become his wife after all, and I wasn't sure that that was true. The wife bit, not the William bit. He was everything I could want in a husband. Nice talking to you as always, I said cheerily. Bye for now, Lucinda. I shivered at the way he drew out my name. Really, I was lucky he didn't just come in person to ask, or else I'd be putty in his hands. The dial tone sounded, freeing me from his questions for at least another week or so. It was difficult to tell when he'd call. After the first year, I'd worked out his pattern and stopped answering. A year later, he had figured out that's what I was doing and varied his calls. I set the phone down and went through to the kitchen. Hunger had been gnawing at me since I woke up this morning, but I kept getting distracted by all the things I needed to do. No matter, I could warm some blood up now and have a drink. It would scratch the itch I'd been feeling, that was for certain. I hummed to myself as I pulled my favourite mug out of the cupboard, followed by a blood pack from the fridge. I squirted the red liquid into the mug, licking my lips. Oops. I maybe shouldn't have waited so long to do this. If I'd been outside, maybe I'd have even ended up taking a munch on an unsuspecting human. The microwave bleeped mere seconds later, and I pulled the mug back out. Ah, yes, this was the life. I took a sip and nearly spat it back out. Oh, negative. Really? I paid too much for the cheap stuff. I should be getting B-type blood from my supplier. I'd have to have words with him next time I place an order. Oh well, it was better than nothing. I'd tracked down a vampire who'd gone without blood too long on one of my previous assignments, and it was not a good look. Certainly not one I could pull off. I perched myself on one of the breakfast bar stools and powered up my laptop, hoping I'd saved the notes I'd been working on the night before. I didn't actually have an assignment at the moment. I was just practicing. Maybe if I could prove I could actually solve things, more people would be interested in hiring me. An email flashed up and I clicked on it. My new gadgets had arrived and Derek had another weapon he wanted me to test. Oh joy. I really should find myself a new tech guy, but vampire-friendly ones were hard to find. It amused me how many black market weapons dealers did their business out of abandoned churches. It didn't matter that no one used them to pray anymore. They still burned me the moment I set foot in one. Despite my reluctance, I typed out a reply, promising him I'd come by in the next week to collect everything and give him a report on the last thing he'd given me, though no one should be subjected to his inventions. Thankfully, none of them ever seemed to go on actual sale. I hoped that was because someone more honest with him than I could bring themselves to tell him that they were rubbish and deadly to the wrong person. He'd given me a portable guillotine once, and I nearly sliced my own head off when it had fired backwards. Not the best idea on either of our parts. I told him the guillotine broke and hidden it in a secret room in the basement. That was where a lot of his inventions ended up. But I held out hope. One day he might actually create something useful. I set down my blood mug and set to work, tapping a pen against my lips and trying to decide what pointless avenue to pursue next. Sometimes I wondered if moving away from the vampire concave and into my grandma's old house was a bad idea. But then I remembered how my parents' generations of vampires acted. There was no place in their minds for modernisation, nor for anything that didn't follow their precise guidelines. Silly vampires. The phone in the other room rang again, the sound slashing through the comfortable silence of the manor. Stupid phone, I swear, I grumbled under my breath as I scuffled through the kitchen with my mug in hand. I wished I could just ignore it, but I wasn't that kind of girl. If I didn't pick up, they'd leave a voicemail, and that was even worse. Lucy's PI service, how can I help? I said, a little less friendly than the first time round. Maybe it was a good thing I didn't get too many assignments. I wasn't great with other people. Hello? I asked, when I was greeted with silence. William, if this is you, I swear... An unknown voice interrupted me. Lucinda Correntine. Speaking. What has 4 legs and no eyes? The gruff voice continued, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I don't know. Figure it out, Miss Correntine. You're the PI after all. The line clicked, and the dial tone rang in my ear before I could question him further. Huh? I mumbled, staring at the empty phone as if it had any answers for me. Just as I was about to walk back to the kitchen and reheat my mug of blood, a sharp knock on the door demanded my attention. I checked the clock standing in the hall. A little late for mail. As fast as my mug would allow without spilling, I hurried through the hall. Why was this house so big? Hello? I called, cracking the door open. My porch was empty apart from a single cardboard box. Okay. If I learned anything about modern cinema, this was either a bomb or a severed head. Not exactly a great housewarming present from whoever it was. Probably William. I rolled my eyes. I didn't want any more random gifts. My attic was exploding with all his strange marriage offerings. A cuckoo clock that didn't scream on the hour. A canoe with my name on it. A mid-century sword collection. A set of human teeth. He really didn't have a good grasp on gift-giving etiquette. Although I quite enjoyed the recent avocado gadget he got me. The 3-in-1 scoop slice pit tool was really handy. But a bomb or a severed head was really one step too far. Great. What was I supposed to do with this gift? Bring it inside? Leave it on the porch? Pretend I never got it? All viable options? Meow, the box exclaimed, rattling a little. What the fangs? Carefully, I poked the cardboard, earning another meow. Was it a meowing head? A cat bomb? Too curious for my own good, I crouched down and peeled the security tape away. A ball of fur jumped out and shot into the house like a black flash. For real? Already exhausted with the situation, I shut the door and followed the cat inside. I didn't want a pet, let alone a cat. I was perfectly fine without a hairy animal occupying my seat and ruining my sleep. If I wanted that, I could just take a husband. Those were just a little more favourable than cats. Here, kitty, kitty. I rolled my eyes, looking under the couches and chairs for the little devilish fiend. Come out, so I can murder you. I shuffled through the house on hands and knees, trying to locate the intruder. There were just so many dark nooks and corners, it was impossible to find a black ball of fur. If this was William's idea of a good gift, he really didn't know me at all. Maybe I should just tell him that now instead of crawling around like an animal. Yes, that was a good idea. Patiently, I let the rotary dial of my old-fashioned spin to combine the phone number that my fiancé had had for the last century. William Williamsborough speaking. How may I help you? Did you send me a cat? And a good day to you too, Lucinda. I hate cats, you know this. The deep voice chuckled, sending shivers down my spine. There was no denying he had an effect on me, even when he was pissing me off. I'm serious, William. I didn't send you anything. Silence. Apart from the telephone booth. But that one is still going through customs. I special ordered it. I don't need a telephone booth, I sighed, slapping my forehead. Are you sure? Your mother told me you were using an old-fashioned device. I thought that this was an upgrade. You talked to my mother? I exclaimed. You know Georgina and I get together every month for bridge soirees. You know this. You should really come and join. It's tradition. Tradition is just peer pressure from dead people, William, I groaned, wishing both him and my mother could just disappear for a day or two and give me some peace. Between the two of them, it was impossible to have a life, which was one of the reasons I finally moved out of the family home and into grandmother's mansion. Annoyed, I doodled little tornadoes on my notepad next to my phone. It was supposed to be for penning down serious inquiries, but I hadn't really gotten many of those, especially not with William hogging the line. So you didn't send me the cat? I asked, wanting to clarify this matter. Someone delivered this feral thing to my door and I wanted to know who it was. No, I did not. Do you have another suitor I don't know about? He asked, his voice lowering even more. Unlikely, I scoffed. What about your friend, Derek? He asked, sounding more amused than jealous. You know I don't have time to date other people. Does that imply you're dating me? I chuckled. Goodbye, William. Always a pleasure. Amused, I rolled my eyes even though he couldn't see it. If he kept this up, I wouldn't have it in me to keep shooting his marriage proposals back. It was good that I was a girl of principles, or I'd long be Lucinda Corintine Williamsborough. The third, I might add. I retreated back to the living room, following the hissing sounds of my newest companion. So, if William hadn't sent it, who had? And what was with the weird riddle from before? 4 legs and no eyes. It seemed ominous, but that didn't mean it couldn't be fun. That was just in the eye of the beholder, as it were. My eye was made to spy. With a grin, I grabbed my badge from the dresser and held it up. P.I. Lucy is on the case. Chapter 2. Something dug into the soft flesh of my face, causing screeching stabs of pain through me. "Get off of me!" I murmured, still in the claws of sleep. Claws. That's what it was. I opened my eyes, finding the black monstrosity looking down at me. Or it would be, if it had eyes. Because not only did it turn out I now have a cat I didn't want or need, but I had a blind cat I didn't want or need. One that would require extra looking after. "I don't know what you're so smug about, Jester. I can barely look after myself." The thing purred, and I found my heart softening a little bit. Oh no. No, no, no. This would not do. I was a vampire, not a witch. I didn't need anything as cliché as a black cat following me around. To be honest, I didn't even know where that stereotype had come from. Witches didn't even exist, so it wasn't like they had created the image for themselves. Unlike vampires, we'd cultivated our image carefully over hundreds of years, and it had worked so well that now no one would believe me when I accidentally revealed I was one. Jester curled up into a ball beside me. That wasn't so bad. It was almost comforting. Almost. I wasn't about to admit that out loud to it, though. I should really work out if it was a boy or a girl, too. Ugh. Why couldn't the cat have come with instructions attached? Even something as simple as a feed twice a day, congrats, it's a girl, would have been better than this mystery. It didn't move, and I took the opportunity to close my eyes and go back to sleep. As soon as I did that, Jester got to its feet again and started pawing at the spot right next to my head. "Right, we're going to the vet," I threatened, throwing back the covers and jumping to my feet. I wasn't normally a morning person, but that thing was changing my mind. But how was I going to actually get it to the vet? It wasn't like I had all the gear that went with owning a cat. Should I just put it back in the box it arrived in? That almost seemed cruel, but at the same time, did I have another option? Oh, wait, I did. There was a huge handbag William had sent because he thought women liked those things. Maybe some even did, but I wasn't the kind to wheel a suitcase around with me everywhere I went. It might take some doing to get the cat in the bag, but once it was, I figured that would do. All I needed to do now was catch it. How was this my life? 20 years ago, I was just a high-born vampire girl doing high-born vampire girl stuff. I should have just sucked it up and dealt with drinking blood from a china teacup while making small talk. At least then I wouldn't be chasing a cat around the room. Ah, fish. I had some in the kitchen cupboard. Though, come to think of it, there was a chance it had gone off. Only one way to find out, though. I sneaked out of the room, shutting the door softly behind me, hoping it would work to keep the cat in there and not let it roam around the house unattended. I didn't think Grandmother would react too well to suddenly finding the fluff ball in her home. The kitchen was dingy, probably due to the early hour. I wasn't normally awake at this time, and for good reason. 11 in the morning was a good time for me. 1 in the afternoon was even better. Vampires might not need to avoid the sun, but we definitely tended to be more nocturnal by nature. I went to the cupboard next to the fridge, sure that there was a tin of sardines in there. Rooting through the dusty cans, I pulled out the rectangular box. Ha! Still in date and everything. It was only when I was part way up the stairs again that I realised it might not be the best idea to go waving fish around my bedroom. Maybe I should have let the damned cat follow me after all. I slipped back into the room, already resigned over what I had to do. At least I was up early enough to put some laundry on if I needed to. Ugh. The day was getting worse with each thought. My nose wrinkled at the salty smell of fish the moment I peeled back the lid. "Here, kitty, kitty. Come get some delicious fish. Ick. I was going to have to sound a lot more convincing if I wanted the cat to listen to me. It's super tasty. Yum, yum, yum. It hissed from under the bed. What do you want then? I sighed loudly. I didn't even know what cats were and weren't allowed to eat, and my phone was on the other side of the bed. Without doing some kind of acrobatics, I was never going to manage to get over there. It crawled towards me, clearly wary about what I was holding. I didn't blame it. I wasn't too sure about the fish either, but it was definitely going on my never buy again list. Even if it had been appetising before today, I would have changed my mind. I set the tin down, hoping there weren't any sharp edge that it would cut its tongue on. Oh no. Now I was starting to care for it. This wasn't good. Maybe I should see if the vet knew of somewhere I could rehome the poor thing. It deserved someone to love it and who actually knew how to look after it. Yes, that was what I'd do. Surely he'd know someone and then we'd all be laughing. And Jester would have a proper home, not an ornate manor house with 2 cranky vampires. If I hadn't had to live in an old ornate manor house with 2 cranky vampires, then I wouldn't. Even if I was one of the aforementioned blood munchers. Well, I scoffed, glaring at the black monster. Don't you like your sardines? Meow. Jester shot me a confused look, the question clear on its face. What? What do you want? I asked, as if articulating would somehow make it understand my exhaustion. What was I supposed to do with a cat that wouldn't let me sleep in and wouldn't eat? Where were the instructions for this thing? What about a receipt so I could return it? Oh, that was not a bad idea. Maybe the box it came in had some type of instructions on how to deal with this blind cat. Did they need special care? So stupid, I muttered, grumbling down the hall with Jester in tow, following me on the heel. If I wanted a pet, I'd have got one myself. I grabbed the box Jester came in from by the door and rummaged through it. Some old newspapers from last month and a little squeaky mouse without a tail. Useless. I stared at my new roommate, softening a little as it looked cutely back. Purr. Jester flicked its tail up and rubbed against my leg, purring heavily as it curled into a little melted heap of fur. What are you looking at? I frowned, crouching down to tickle its belly. Soft, surprisingly warm and lightly vibrating. Fluffy. I guess you're kind of cute. Meow. Fine. You can stay for now. I wagged my finger, hoping it would understand that this meant it wasn't out of the woods just yet. How intelligent were those creatures anyway? Did they understand commands? Sit. Jester looked at me, its head tilted curiously to the side. Purr? Right then. What do you want? Some milk? A cookie? Careful not to step on it, I walked back to the kitchen to rummage back through the cupboards for anything it might like. Apart from some old crackers and a block of cheese that had been here when I moved in, there wasn't much else edible in there. Aha! What about some tuna? The metal lid shrieked and released a fishy smell that was way too strong for so early in the morning. I definitely needed to wash that away with some scalding hot coffee. But first, I needed to get this cat silent so it would leave me alone. Tuna? I held the can out, excited that Jester took a sniff. Meow. It swished its tail in a shrug-like manner and wandered off without giving me a second look. Well, that's grand. With my tuna in hand, I glared at the cat, strutting through the manor like it owned the place. Effortless, it jumped up on the windowsill and curled into a ball on the thin strip of sun. Fine, don't eat. I clonked the can down in the corner of the kitchen where Jester could reach it whenever it wanted. If this was how it wanted to play, I'd play. It wasn't the only stubborn creature around. If I was going to survive this day, I needed coffee. Hot, black, and a bucket of it. Sleep still warred in my eyes, and I flicked the kettle on and grabbed my grinder and filters from the cupboard. Even the smell of freshly roasted coffee beans was enough to cheer me up, especially when they released all their aromatics in the grind. I heaped a tablespoon of ground beans into the filter and nestled it on top of my mug. With a splash of hot water, I watered the grind so it would release all its delicious flavours. Coffee was one of the few things that satisfied my appetite, beyond the necessary drink of blood. In the 100 years that I'd been isolated from the human world, some big and fancy machines came onto the market, or so Derek had tried to explain to me numerous times. They brewed coffee in seconds and spouted it out in shots. Scary. I didn't understand it, and I didn't want to. It was too loud, too shiny, and it didn't fit my morning ritual. The shrieking of my grinder, the tentative watering of the ground beans, and finally, a freshly brewed cup of coffee. With a satisfied smile, I slurped from the top. The first taste was just the best. The bitter notes, the tangy aroma, the faint hint of burnt chocolate. So complex and simple at the same time. Heaven in a mug. Now that's the life, I nodded to myself, slipping onto one of the kitchen bar stools and taking a moment to enjoy my morning. It wasn't so bad to be up early after all. The world was still asleep and hadn't gotten to its usual clamour of honking cars, screaming children and grumbling people. It was quiet, peaceful, undisturbed. How long would I get to enjoy the silence until someone bothered me? Chapter 3. Derek, come in! I stepped back, inviting the vampire in. He didn't technically need to be, but it was polite, and if there was one thing Mother managed to actually teach me, it was always be polite to guests. Thank you, Lucy. He shot me a boyish grin, one that made him look much younger than he was. I guided him to the living room and gestured to one of the couches. So, what brings you here? Did you not get my email? Oh, right, your newest gadget. I sank into the other couch, slightly praying for mercy. There was no doubt that Derek was inventive, but his technical skills left much to be desired. It wouldn't be the first time that a loose blade or hinge almost lobbed my head off. I think you'll like this one. He placed his bag down and pulled a large box from it. I call it the Derek Danger Detector 3000. Okay. Not wanting to hurt his feelings, I held my face from twitching. Apart from his questionable manufacturing skills, he also needs to work on his naming. Even if he managed to make something insanely cool, the dorky name would almost certainly ruin it. It's got a built-in camera, a motion-detecting laser, and an alarm that even you can't sleep through. Is that a challenge? I pulled up my eyebrow, shooting him a daring look. He always made big claims, but even this one was a little far. I could sleep through anything. Well, apart from Jester clawing into me. But that was different. You could test it tomorrow, and let me know if it did or didn't wake you. I bet it will, he stated confidently. And what makes you think I'll tell you the truth? I could always stay over and draw my own conclusions when morning comes, he teased. Wouldn't you like that? I flirted back, hoping I didn't blush. I wasn't particularly opposed towards Derek. He was just a little too goofy, and he'd been my friend for a long time. Not just that, I wasn't really in the right mood to date. I didn't even have time to date my actual fiancé. You know I would, he answered honestly. He'd never hid his intentions well, and I appreciated that. I don't think that's the best idea, Derek, I replied softly, just as I had many times. I'd never hidden my own apprehensions, and he respected that. Fair enough. Now, can we test out my DDD 3000? You're calling it DDD? I asked, shooting him a bemused look. Sounds like you're talking about something else. Now, Lucy, he scolded playfully. More comments like that and I'll believe you are interested in me after all. Sorry, I couldn't resist. That's what she said, he said in a high voice. Sorry, back to the detector. Can I test my pitch on you too? Sure, give it a go, I sighed. He tweaked his eyebrow, and I hastily corrected myself. I mean, yes, you can do your pitch. Great. He cleared his throat and straightened out his jacket. Worried about burglars breaking in? Can't leave your home without worrying about your valuables? No more with the Derek Danger Detector 3000. It's sleek, it's hot, and it'll keep you safe. No more danger with the DDD 3000. Your safety is our priority. Ha! I muttered, staring him blankly in the face. Are you trying to sell this to gullible old ladies? What? No, of course not. It's a serious piece of equipment. I wouldn't expect little old ladies to want or need it, he responded instantly. Then why is your pitch about burglars? I cocked my head to the side and gave him a flirty grin. I really shouldn't. It was mean of me to let him think that he might have the hope of something between us. No matter how many times I said not yet to William, I did actually intend to marry him. And I wasn't the kind of girl who wanted to lead someone on, especially not when they were as nice as Derek. It seems like something a normal person would worry about, he tried. I shrugged. I guess that's true, but are you trying to sell it to normal people or to vampires? What should I be saying? He coughed and glanced down at his knee before looking up at me again. Are you worried about your food getting away? Use the DDD 3000 to make sure you're woken up when your human harem tries to make a break for it. I almost choked on my laughter. Do people have human harems anymore? You're the noble, you tell me. I don't go back often enough to know, I answered honestly. But I can imagine a few of them who wouldn't have any qualms about keeping humans just to feed on. Thankfully, William and his family weren't one of them. At the worst, they were guilty of being a little bit elitist. One of the many things I loved about him. No, not loved. Why would I even think that? It was a dangerous path to go down at the best of times, never mind while I had company. I never get an invite. I'm my father's least favourite child. I thought you had a half-vampire brother. He told me accidentally once when he was drunk. How do you know that? His eyes widened. You told me. I gave him an odd look. Did he really not remember the conversation? That's not something I tell anyone. He crossed his arms and pouted. It is after you've had half a bottle of vodka, I muttered. It had been from one of my bottles of the good stuff too. I'd made sure to hide that every time I knew he was visiting since. Damn it. I'm not supposed to talk about him. It's not a big deal. I'm not about to tell anyone, I pointed out. Please don't. Some people won't take it well if they found out. I could see the earnestness on his face. He really was worried about if this was going to come out. And I could understand that. Vampires weren't the most forgiving sorts, and having a child with a human was seen as a big indiscretion. Keeping the child around, it just wasn't done. Every family has a skeleton or 6 in their closet, I pointed out. Some of them are even from real bodies. Derek snorted. And are you one of the people with skeletons in your closet? Only Daisy, but she doesn't count. The look on his face was priceless. I hadn't used that joke in a long time. Do I get an explanation? Nope. I only tell my most trusted confidants about Daisy. Before I could respond, a purring sound announced Jester walking into the room. You got a cat? Derek asked, surprise very obvious in his tone. Of sorts. I didn't actually get it. More, it arrived in a box with nothing but a collar and a lot of mischief. Jester looked at me, which I would have thought would have been too difficult for a blind cat to do, and yet it managed. That was slightly freaky, and I wasn't too sure how to deal with it. Maybe the thing had some kind of creepy sixth sense. It hissed and turned to Derek. Great. I'd given it somewhere to sleep and fish to eat, and yet it already seemed to hate me. Maybe it could sense my disdain for it. It jumped up on Derek's lap and pawed against his jeans, drawing my gaze to somewhere I really shouldn't be looking on the other vampire. I glanced away, hoping to hide the blush I was sure coloured my cheeks. I didn't understand what it was about him. Maybe it was just the fact that he was like me. Neither of us were part of vampire society, and we liked it that way. Well, that wasn't quite true. Both of us were still part of society, we just didn't actively spend time with all of the others. There was nothing wrong with that in anyone's eyes, but it did form some kind of bond between us, without us intending it to. Who's a good boy? Derek asked as he scratched the top of Jester's head. It's male, I blurted out. You don't know? I shook my head. I must have missed the class at school where we learned how to determine the sex of a cat, I quipped. Derek put his hand on each side of Jester's tummy, surprisingly not getting scratched for his troubles. I should start calling Derek the cat whisperer. He certainly had a way with the creature. Last I checked, this should have been an indication. He pointed at the cat's groin, and sure enough, it was male. Ah. Now I just felt stupid. But then, how many people went around eyeing up a cat's bits? What are you planning on doing with him? I'm going to take him to the vet. I didn't add that I was going to see if the vet knew anyone who'd take the damn thing. That's a good start. He appears to be blind. Yes, I noticed. You might need to make some adjustments for that, but the vet will know better. I frowned at him. How do you know so much about cats? And why hadn't I made tea when he arrived? The question would have been so much better if I'd had a teacup to sip from while I asked it. One of my brothers used to have one, but never actually looked after it. I got to know the thing pretty well. Oh. I started fiddling with the hem of my shirt, trying to place why I felt so disappointed that I didn't know him as well as I thought. Anyway, the DDD 3000. I tried not to snigger as I said his stupid acronym. Maybe that would help me actually test the thing without losing my will to live. Yes, just plug it in next to your bed and you're good to go. It's not battery powered? My eyes widened. He sighed. No, not yet. I want to make sure the design is worth pursuing before I do anything like account for a battery pack. Oh, right. Derek would always confuse me. His inventions even more so. But as I watched him with my new cat, I couldn't help but feel a wave of affection for him. If I didn't already have William, then I could have done worse than the vampire in front of me. That wasn't worth thinking about, though. I was an engaged woman, even if the engagement had lasted 100 years or so. I couldn't let myself be enamoured with someone else. Chapter 4. Beep! 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 I sat bolt upright in bed. The sleep I'd been so comfortably encased in now completely gone. Jester hissed from where I'd roused him, but he did nothing more than curl back into a ball. I shouldn't have let the thing sleep on the bed with me, but even I had to admit that it had been nice to have something warm and fuzzy pressed against me. It was almost comforting, if it hadn't been an evil cat who wouldn't take my fish offerings. My alarm clock sat on the side, not making a single sound. Huh? I hadn't set an alarm anyway, so it going off would be odd, but that was the most logical explanation. Unless... I swung my legs around, placing my feet on the floor and padding through the room, grateful I was wearing an oversized t-shirt I'd salvaged from one of William's drawers. It had long ago lost his smell, but it was still comfy. The flashing lights from the hall made me roll my eyes. Of course his inventions didn't work, I muttered. I slipped through the door to reset the stupid DDD-3000. I'd have to tell Derek that it had been set off by nothing more than a light breeze. He'd be disappointed, but better than ending up with angry customers demanding to know why they weren't getting any sleep. I flicked the switch, shutting off the flashing lights and the annoying bleeping sound. Those probably hadn't been the best choice of system alarm either. I made another mental note to give him feedback before returning to my bedroom. At least it didn't seem to have woken Grandmother. I didn't think she'd be pleased with him in that situation. Ah! I jumped back into the door, shocked to find a man standing in the middle of my room. Jester looked up, noticing him too, and began to hiss. Huh. It seemed the cat was a little protective of me. Maybe our fledgling relationship could be saved after all, though I wasn't holding my breath on it. Who are you? I asked the man, letting my fangs extend. If he was another vampire, I was screwed if he wanted to hurt me. But if he was a human, then there'd be something I could do about it. Jonas. All right, Jonas. I eyed him warily. Why'd he tell me his name? Was it even his real one? I had no way of knowing. The one thing I was sure of was that I didn't know anyone named Jonas. What are you doing here? I asked, when he didn't expand on it himself. William sent me, he answered. William? I frowned. That made no sense. He was bad with presents. There was no doubt about that. But this was a whole new level. What was I going to do with a Jonas? He said you might be able to help me. And you didn't think the chances of that would be higher if you'd knocked on the door? What was it with vampires and perpetuating a stereotype? Some of us did our best to live a life that didn't draw attention to us. Then there were the Jonases of the world, creeping in through windows in the middle of the night and being cryptic. It really didn't help our overall image. I don't like doors. Right. And that means you won't respect other people's privacy and use them? I narrowed my eyes at him. He said you could help me, he repeated lamely. Come back in the morning, I told him. Knock on the door and ask me that way. I can't, he responded. Why in the stakes not? I let out the exasperated sigh I'd been holding in. At least it didn't look like I was in any danger from him. Something Jester had already seemingly decided as he'd curled back into a ball and gone back to sleep. Note to self, I shouldn't rely on the cat to protect me. I can't be seen asking you for help. Then you don't need me, I countered. Good night, Jonas. I'd say it was a pleasure to meet you, but I'd rather have been basted in garlic and boiled in holy water. Not that either of those could kill me. Well, the boiling could. Just not the garlic or holy water. Unless the water was in a place of worship. The rules of being a vampire were confusing, to say the least. I do need you, he protested. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Then you'll do what I asked and come back tomorrow. I can get you some nice B-positive blood, he hastily said. I opened one eye, my interest piqued. I did hate the O-negative stuff, and my current supplier wasn't very flexible. How? I asked, looking him up and down. He didn't look too shabby, but he wasn't particularly well dressed either. No stiff collar, no pressed shirt, and no penguin shoes. Not a noble attire. If I couldn't get the decent blood, how would a commoner get his hands on it? I know a guy. He'll get you the freshest B-positive blood for the whole year. Jonas shot me a begging look. "Please, I'm desperate." "Fine, but I want a 2-year supply." "Done." The man reached out to shake my hand and I glared at him. "Get out of my bedroom, dude." "Right, sorry." "Go wait downstairs so I can get dressed," I ordered, shooing him out of my bedroom. I already had a fiancé that kept proposing, and a Derek. I didn't need another man with no boundaries. Jester let out an adorable little yawn, stretched himself into a thin tube, and jumped down. He shot me a questioning look, his tail flicking back and forth. Yes, I'm getting up. I'll feed you in a second, you hairy monster." Another perfectly good morning ruined by me having to get up. If I couldn't stay in tomorrow, I'd bolt down the doors and windows so nobody could disturb me. Ugh, mornings. Grumbling to myself, I wrapped a bathrobe around me and descended down to the kitchen. Jonas could go stand on his head, but I'd have coffee before he roped me into whatever issue he needed me to solve. William really needed to stop referring his friends to me with their petty problems. Lost keys, missing bills, and locating a sweater were hardly serious cases for a PI. Nonetheless, my fiancé couldn't stop telling them all how proud he was, and subsequently I felt too guilty to say no to his friends. At least it got me the gratitude of some important people and interesting rewards. I ran my finger along the antique dresser in the hallway, nodding to myself. This beauty certainly had been worth the trouble of finding a lost cat for William's brother. The sudden sound of clinking cups and slamming cupboard doors had me sprinting to the kitchen, where I found Jonas dusted in flour. "Nice place you got here," he said sheepishly, shooting me an awkward grin. "What are you doing?" I exclaimed, pulling the bag of flour from his hands. What was his problem? Why was he rummaging through my cupboards? What the fuck was he doing? "I was looking for sugar," he admitted. "Why? For my tea?" He pointed to the steaming cup on the counter, shrugging as if it was the most normal thing to break in through a window and brew your own tea in their kitchen. A familiar anger boiled up in my stomach, one that I'd done so well at keeping at bay since I'd moved away from Mother. Trembling with fury, my rage curled and coiled through my veins in an unstoppable force. To stop my hands from shaking, I balled them into fists and shoved them deep in the pockets of my robe. 1, 2, 3, 4, I counted under my breath, trying to keep myself from exploding and killing William's friend in my kitchen. That would surely be a morning to remember. 5, 6, 7. "What are you doing?" "I'm counting," I hissed. "Counting what?" "All the ways I'm going to kill you." I yanked the mug from his hand and slammed it into the sink. "Use the fucking door and don't make tea in someone else's house unless you want to get hung by your testicles." "Jeez, you're crabby." "William didn't mention that." "It's 4 o'clock in the frickin' morning." Jonas shrugged, clearly unbothered. "Never mind, I'll do without tea. Are you ready to hear about my case now?" Without waiting for me to reply, he strolled out of the kitchen and made himself comfortable in one of the living room chairs. Seething at his behaviour, I gnawed at my nails to keep myself from destroying the house and turning William's rude friend into another skeleton in my closet. He could keep Daisy company, although I was pretty sure he'd still be a menace even when dead. "Fucking fuckwad," I grumbled, pulling the bag of coffee beans from the cupboard. Not having the patience to make a decent cup, I just threw a handful of beans in my mouth and cracked them up with my teeth. Not the best way to have my morning brew, but better than committing vampiricide. Why was I even going to listen to his problem? I should just kick him to the curb and yell a little at William. He was a lovely man, but his choice in friends was terrible. Case in point, Jonas, the arsehole. I grabbed hold of the counter, tensing and squeezing as hard as I could to get rid of the rampant anger within me. I didn't like this side of myself. I'd been doing so well in keeping my temper under control, but being woken at 4 by an obnoxious vampire was enough to set it off. Be calm. Be calm. Think calm thoughts, Lucy, I chanted to myself, trying to calm my breathing. I am calm, and the calmness is me. I inhaled deeply, hoping it would clear my lungs and my head. Let go of the anger. Release. After giving myself a couple of minutes to calm down, I felt confident I could face up to my visitor again, unless he'd somehow managed to be even worse of a guest. That thought spurred me on to hurry into the living room and find out what he was up to. I didn't want him to start redecorating or host a garage sale out of the window. The angst in my heart lifted when I found him sitting neatly in the middle of the large sofa, with his hands on his knees and his boyish smile. He looked nothing like the arse who broke in and violated the most sacred tea rule. So, Jonas. I sat down opposite of him, folding my hands neatly and chaining the anger down so it couldn't lash out at him again. What can I do for you today? I need help finding an item. An item? I reached for the notepad on the coffee table and clicked my pen. What kind of item? A lost item. I ground my teeth down, letting out a long breath instead of snapping at him again. Please describe this particular lost item. Oh, it's an engraved watch. Right. What did the watch look like? Jonas stared at me, blinking slowly. Like a watch. Slowly, I clicked my pen and closed my notepad. I don't think this is going to work out, Jonas. I can give you some great PI recommendations, I suggested, wondering which of my contacts I hated most. Sending this nightmare client to them would be like the worst pain I could ever inflict on them. Atticus. It had to be Atticus. I hated that smug bastard. He'd cursed me for all eternity if I sent Jonas his way. I can give you the number of a great PI. Jonas shook his head. No, it can't be anyone else but you. Why? I sighed, refraining from slapping my forehead. It would be well deserved, though. Well, this matter is rather delicate. You see, my wife, she is, human, he whispered, checking over his shoulder to make sure we were alone. Don't worry, nobody will hear us unless someone else came in through the window, I said. But okay. What makes you think I want to help you find your human wife's watch? William said you were pro-human. I'm not anti-human, I argued, rolling my eyes. Only William would openly admit to be part of the new wave. In our circles, that was a dangerous thing to do. But he never hid his position towards humans. It was one of the things I admired about him, even if I wasn't ready to be disowned. One day I would speak up about it, when Mother was dead or so. Good enough. The watch. It was the last gift from my wife before. He hid his face in his hands, his voice lowered to a deep hum. Before she was taken from me. I'm sorry. Guilt swelled up in my stomach. His loss wasn't an excuse for his rude behaviour, but I could understand why a man in distress would be a little bonkers. I've looked everywhere, but I just can't find it. It would mean the world to me if you could locate it. I reached for the notepad again. Fine. I'll need a detailed description of... Actually, do you just have a picture of it? Oh, yes. He reached in his pocket and held out one of those fancy screen phones. Smartphones? He swiped the screen and held it out to me. Here. Classic hand-wound tourbillon chronograph with 2 dials, an alligator leather strap, and a sapphire case. I sighed. This isn't going to work if you lie to me, Jonas. His ears reddened. What lie? I'm not a watch expert, but even I can tell that's faux leather. The tourbillon is clearly just for gimmicky show, and that's probably just a sapphire finish at best, I sighed, silently thanking my dad for my random knowledge on whiskey, watches and cigars. Fine, it's not an expensive watch at all, but it's still dear to me. Please find it for me. Do you know where you had it last? I sighed. Jonas shot me a guilty look. No, of course not. Great. Chapter 5. I paused outside the entrance of the shop. I really hoped I wouldn't have to come here, but none of the human pawn shops I'd been to had anything that even closely resembled Jonas's stupid watch. Could this be William's odd way of trying to get me to come back to vampire society? I wouldn't put it past him to try something so misguided, but then that wouldn't quite fit with what his long-term goal was. Despite his quirks, I truly believed William wanted me to be happy, and that I'd be happy with him. I just couldn't tell him that until I was happier in myself. Contrary to my mother's belief, I hadn't left vampire society in a fit of teenage rebellion. I'd done it because I wasn't happy and needed a change. Grandmother's offer to move into her old manor house just happened to come at the perfect time. Come on, Lucy. You know putting it off will only make it worse, I muttered to myself. Talking to oneself was most definitely the sign of a complex and worthy mind. At least that was what I was going to keep telling myself. There was a good chance I was wrong and just going crazier each time I did it, but only time would tell. The door squealed as it opened, the sound going right through me. Would it kill Jeremy to oil it sometime? It wasn't like he was short of money. All the vampires I knew used his pawnshop to hide their dirty little secrets. If objects could talk, his shelves would be filled with the whispers of things no one wanted airing into the world. I had to wonder how many of those secrets belonged to members of my own family. We were one of the oldest, which meant that Daisy wasn't the only thing hiding in our closets. Lucinda! I didn't expect to see you here, Jeremy exclaimed from behind his counter, clapping his hands together and jutting out his hip in a way no straight man would ever be caught dead doing. Vampires, in general, weren't all that big on labelling sexuality. We lived so long that it was easy to look past what bits people had. Not Jeremy, though. He was as gay as they come and proud of it. He'd been subjected to many photos of him strutting his stuff at pride parades. It wasn't that I had a problem with the parades themselves, I just didn't like seeing photos of acquaintances decked out in nothing more than glitter and a G-string. And I'm even more surprised to be here, I returned. Did William send you to pick out a ring? He asked eagerly. I raised my eyebrow. What makes you think I don't already have a ring? I did, and it took all my presence of thought not to touch it as I spoke. I might not have technically said yes to his proposal, but that didn't mean I hadn't accepted the ring. I'd take it off from around my neck and put it on my finger when I was good and ready, something William knew full well. So, what are you here for? An old family heirloom? You have some of those here. I wasn't able to keep the hint of surprise out of my voice. He waved his hand towards a shelf with what appeared to be a withered skull on it. I believe this once belonged to your great-great-grandfather. I grimaced. I bet it was Terence. He was my great-great-grandparent, most likely to have something as weird as that. He'd probably thought it was good for his fertility or some rubbish like that. It was amazing that some vampires would believe anything if you promised them what they wanted. I think I'll pass, thank you. One day you might have need of it. And if I do, then you'll be the first to know. I tried to keep the distaste out of my voice, but it rivaled the amount I felt whenever I had to deal with my mother and her friends. "It's a shame, Lucinda. I'd have thought he'd look lovely in your family home." "I'm sure he would," I deadpanned. "I'm actually here about a watch." "Oh!" Jeremy leaned forward, a perfectly manicured eyebrow raised questioningly. "A friend has misplaced one very dear to him. Would you mind if I took a look at the ones you have in store?" He sighed loudly. "I suppose so. You'll be disappointed, though." He motioned for me to come over to the far cabinet. "This is my selection of timepieces." One look at the display and I had to close my eyes to starve off the exasperation within me. "I don't think a pocket sundial counts as a timepiece," I said. "On the contrary. Does it keep the time?" Jeremy asked. "Not accurately, and not with ease either. In the wrong hands it could tell you precisely the wrong time," I pointed out. "And yet it will tell you a time, but a wrong one. You didn't specify you were looking for an accurate timepiece." He stood back. "I think it was implied," I muttered under my breath. "You should never imply something when you know exactly what you wanted. It just wastes all of our time." My eyes fluttered closed again and I counted to 10, determined not to do anything crazy like rip his throat out. He might deserve it, but the look of expected disapproval on my mother's face as I stood trial for it wouldn't be worth it. I pulled out my phone, thumbing through the photos of Jester to find the one Jonas had sent me of the watch. I hadn't meant to take so many pictures of the stupid cat, but he just looked so cute, all curled up in the sun this morning, that I couldn't help it. I wasn't quite ready to admit that I'd be keeping the creature, but deep down, I knew it was inevitable. "Have you seen this?" I asked, showing him the photo. "I wouldn't know if I had," I scowled. Why did he have to be so awkward? "Why not?" I asked. "Because there's nothing special about the watch. There must be thousands of them in existence. Even if I'd seen one, I'd have no way of knowing if it was actually this one." I groaned. I'd realised Jonas was exaggerating how expensive his watch was, but this was even beyond that. Ugh. At least that meant I didn't have to spend more time in the pawn shop of shame. "Thank you, Jeremy. Goodbye." "Wait!" I rolled my eyes. "Yes." "While you're here." "Oh, for fang's sake, what now?" Jeremy dove under the counter, rummaging loudly until he held a little dusty envelope up. "Found it. That's for you." "Old correspondence? No thanks." I couldn't get a handle of all the spam pouring through the mail slot of my door. I didn't need more unopened junk. The gay vampire chuckled, clicking his tongue. "You'll want this. It's for your fiancé." "Give it to him yourself," I deflected, tapping my imaginary hat and making a little bow. I wasn't anyone's mailman, and certainly not William's. "It's from your grandfather," Jeremy sang, waving the envelope teasingly from left to right, not unlike the piece of string I'd been using to play with Jester. "Fine, give it to me." "Ah, it comes attached with a favour." "I thought I was the one doing you a favour," I grumbled, glaring at the shopkeeper. His family was notorious for their numerous offspring. Surely they wouldn't miss one little Jeremy if I wrung his neck and let him keep Daisy company. Annoyed, I drummed my fingers on the glass counter. Whatever he needed to say, he'd better do it quick. "You're friends with that Gregario boy, isn't that right?" I frowned. "Derek? That's the one." I'd hardly call him a boy, but yeah, I guess he's my friend. With a sly grin, Jeremy pushed a notebook forward. "Number, please." "Excuse me?" "Gosh, do you need me to spell out everything for you?" "I would like his number because I think he's cute." Wow, What are we? 15? Right. How about no? Ask him yourself. I scoffed, flipping my hair over my shoulder and turning on my heels. Not even a potentially interesting letter for William would convince me to give out my friend's personal details. Ha! Friend. I suppose that was what Derek meant to me. I hadn't thought of it that way. He was more like that flirty, quirky guy I knew. But even so, friend sounded nice. The door shrieked even louder than when I came in, and a little harder than necessary, I slammed it closed. That'll teach Jeremy for trying to bribe me. This was why I didn't like coming to the pawn shop, but I didn't have much choice this time. With a sigh, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my small notepad. Another location to scratch off. So that was a no to Jonas's workplace, his maid, and the pawn shop. But where to go next? Chapter 6. Was I really going to do this? Was I this desperate to find Jonas's watch? I didn't even like the guy. But a case was a case, and it wasn't like I had anything better to do. Well, apart from trying to find a fish that Jester liked to eat. Silly blind cat didn't know what he liked and wanted. I picked up the phone and smacked it back down, growled at myself and grabbed it again. The rotary dial whirled softly as I selected a number I hardly ever called. Within the first 3 rings, someone picked up. Williamborough, a deep voice said. Good morning, William Senior. It's Lucy. Is William around? I asked, pre-exhausted by the exchange I knew was going to follow. William speaking. No, I meant your son. Which one? Senior asked stubbornly, like he always did. William, I said between clenched teeth. William speaking. Suppressing the urge to slam the phone onto the hook, I took a deep breath. I'd like to talk to William Williamsborough III, please. No matter how much Senior insisted, I refused to refer to William as Junior, or worse, Willie. If they wanted to avoid the confusion of having 3 Williams, they should have coughed up some originality and chosen a different name. Certainly. Who's calling again? This man. He knew perfectly well who was calling. He'd known me for almost my entire life. It's Lucy, I replied sweetly, imagining all the colourful ways I could murder him in his sleep. Ah, Lucinda, I'll find Junior. Thank you. I covered the phone with my hand. Not a moment too soon, you old bat. The line crackled, and a new voice spoke. Hello? I recognised the sound of my fiancé's voice immediately, and despite myself, a warmth welled up in my chest. Traitorous feelings. I wasn't ready yet. Hi, William. Lucy? He said, almost sounding surprised that it was actually me on the line. My. You never call. Are you finally ready to accept my proposal? Not for another 100 years, I joked, mindlessly playing with the necklace. One day I'd wear his ring. We both knew I would. He chuckled deeply, awakening butterflies in my stomach. Even through the phone, I could tell how much affection he held for me. I need your help, I admitted, trying to cage any fluttery feelings that weren't wanted, welcome, or appropriate. What can I do for you? Are you in trouble? He asked, his voice going from amused to serious in 2 seconds flat. Despite his father's attempts of raising a cold and heartless son, William had grown up to be a caring and loving man. One of the many things that I admired about him. He really would make the perfect husband. One day, when I didn't carry so much sorrow and pain within me. No, I'm okay. It's about your friend, Jonas. Oh, I see. Did you take his case? Did you seriously not already know the answer to that? I asked with a sigh. No, Lucy, I don't. Otherwise I wouldn't have asked. From anyone else, those words would have sounded so exasperated, but not from William. His patience with me was astounding, as shown by the multiple decade-long engagement. "Oh, sorry. I thought he'd told you. There hasn't really been a chance. I know I'm known as part of the pro-human faction, but that doesn't mean people like Jonas can just turn up here to tell me things like my errant almost fiancé has taken on his case. Can you imagine my father's reaction?" I sniggered slightly. William Sr. was well known for his conservative opinions, and would force them on anyone that would listen. Unfortunately, that had been me during several awkward dinner parties. From the fact that William was even saying things like this, I assumed his father must have left the room. "All right, you have a point there. So, what did he want you to find?" "You don't know." The silence told me everything I needed to. "Right, sorry. You'd have said if you knew. He wants me to find a watch his wife gave him." "Is that all?" William asked, confusion filling his voice. That wasn't a good sign. "Yes, but it's common as muck, and no matter how many places I've tried, nothing seems to be working." I sighed dramatically, but didn't say anything else. I wanted his help, that much I was sure of, and yet I didn't want to do anything like ask for it. That could give him the wrong impression completely. "Do you want me to come and see if I can be any help?" he asked. Yes. The word slipped out without me meaning to, but that was okay. I was looking forward to seeing him in a weird way. All right, not that weird. William was handsome, charming. He made me laugh and he treated me with respect. Plus, he was the one thing in my life that actually had my mother's approval, which said something. Perhaps I should be dating someone she didn't like, just to prove a point. But that would come at the cost of William. Maybe. He'd never actually seemed averse to the idea of me seeing other people, which I appreciated. Not many men would have been as open to it as he was, especially when I'd basically asked him to stay faithful to me for a century. "Okay, I have something I need to tie up here today, but I can be with you by the end of the week," he promised. My heart skipped a beat. William. No, this was not me. I wasn't about to let myself be influenced by how I feel about a man. Bad Lucy. "I'll make your normal room ready for you." The hesitance on the phone was palpable, but I couldn't let myself read too much into it. He wouldn't say a word about staying in the room next to mine instead of in my bed. He never did. "I'm looking forward to seeing you, Lucy," he said softly. "Me too. It's been too long." I paused. "It has," I admitted after a moment. "I'll see you soon." The phone clicked before I could answer, which was probably a good thing. I could feel the verbal diarrhea on its way up. Knowing my luck, I'd probably end up setting a date for the wedding by accident and then regret it in the morning. That was the Lucy way, after all. An odd echoing sound drew my attention to the hallway. I really hoped that was Jester. I didn't know what I'd do if it wasn't. The last thing I needed was another unwelcomed intrusion into my quiet country life. I could cause quite enough trouble without anyone else's help, and I intended to keep it that way. "Hello? Jester?" Well, that was stupid. The cat wasn't exactly about to respond to me. Nobody responded. But then, they wouldn't if they wanted to catch me unawares. Now, my options were a blind cat or someone who wanted to hurt me. Great. This day just kept getting better and better. I crouched down. "Here, Jester, Jester." I made a weird pursing sound with my lips. I'd seen people do it on TV, but never knew if it worked or not. I was about to find out. Nothing happened. Right. Probably an intruder just waiting to burst in and try to stake me or something. My fangs dropped down, ready to defend me. Not that they did much. The pinprick of a gnat bite was nothing against an attacker with a gun. Maybe if I got all bloodlusted up, but that was harder than the movies made it out to be. And nowhere near as fun. All those vampires with lusted-up eyes and blood dripping down their skin. Complete and utter garbage. "Jester?" I called out again, creeping forward. If there wasn't a chance I'd burst into flames, I'd have sent up a prayer of hope. I wasn't going to take my chances. It wasn't worth my potential death. I needed to get Jester some kind of bell. Then I'd be able to tell when it was him and not someone trying to murder me. Creeping through the doorway into the corridor, I looked around. "Oh, it's you." I rushed forward and scooped up the cat. Jester hissed and scrambled against my arms. His tiny claws gripped into my skin, making tiny tears that I'm sure would sting the moment I got into the shower and got soap in there. "Hold still! I'm just trying to show you some love," I demanded of the cat. He probably didn't understand me at all, but that was beside the point. "We're going to have company soon. William's coming. You'll like him. He won't touch you at all. Though maybe you don't like that. You seemed to like it when Derek petted you. Is it just me you have a problem with?" I rambled away, not caring that the cat couldn't answer even if he wanted to. The thought of seeing William coiled my stomach in twists and knots. Even though there were no signs that he was done waiting for me, I always worried he'd find someone else. It wasn't likely. Especially not because our non-engagement was common knowledge at this point. But still, I didn't want to lose him. Maybe it was time to settle down. Chapter 7. Nervously, I tugged on the hem of my dress to stop it from riding up. Why did I bother with this uncomfortable piece of crap again? Oh, right, William. I wanted to look good for him. Not that he'd ever complained about seeing me in informal attire, and knowing him, he probably didn't care either. But I did. I didn't want to start rumours and embarrass him. His strict father wouldn't take kindly to such talk. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my tongue flitting along my elongated teeth. I wasn't supposed to have them out in public, but I hated having them fully retracted. I stopped bothering when I realised nobody cared, not even humans. At most, I got a comment about how cool it looked and a thumbs up. Hardly worth dealing with the discomfort of pretending I didn't have fangs. Where was William? In all the time I'd known him, he was never late for anything. The Williamsboroughs were known for their punctuality. A shadow fell across the cement pavement, dancing with the leaves caught in a gust of wind. Pointed shoes, neatly tied laces, and dark socks that matched the rest of the fabrics and materials. There was only one man I knew that always looked perfect. William. I batted my eyes up, meeting his piercing sky-blue gaze. The wind played with his short curls as he stood in front of me, tall and handsome, his vest open, his hands deep in his pockets, and a rare smile on his lips, one he reserved for just me. "Good afternoon, Lucinda." His voice took my breath away, just like it always did when we met up. The warmth reminded me of honey, and the pleasant tickle of mead. There was something to the way he spoke that just didn't translate over the phone. But when he looked at me like that, I melted. "Good afternoon, William." The corner of his mouth curled, his eyes lighting up when I said his name. I was the only one who used his full name, and I knew he appreciated it. He deserved better than Junior or William III. To me, he was just William, and there was nobody like him. "It's good to see you," he said sincerely. Despite myself, I smiled. "It is." "Would you like to accompany me for coffee?" he asked, fully well knowing I would never say no to a cup of coffee. He held out his arm in a way that humans would say was outdated, but it suited him. It suited us. I laced my arm through his, relaxing as I stood by his side. "Lead the way." From my position, I could see the little satisfied grin playing on William's lips. His special smile fanned the coals in my stomach, turning them into a roaring fire. When he was a voice in the phone, it was easy to keep my composure and pride. But when he stood near me, my hand on his arm, his heart beating under my touch, his smile lighting up his face, it was so tempting to just put on his ring and become Mrs. Williamsborough. One day. "Are you dressed for a walk?" William asked, looking at my feet. His forehead wrinkled in confusion as he studied my boots. I chuckled as I pressed myself lightly into him. "I am." "Good. I've heard about a new place that serves great coffee. I think you'll like it." Without even thinking about it, I followed to wherever William led me. That was how I'd always been and how I hoped it would stay. After a short walk through rows of tall trees and a bed of orange leaves, we reached a little cosy cafe on the corner. With wooden shutters and a checkered marquee over the door, it could have passed for a quaint, normal coffee house. If it hadn't been for the decorative stakes displayed in the windows and a sign above the door. "Coffee and coffins," I read, looking at William and bursting into laughter. "Is this a real place?" He nodded proudly. "It sure is." "Now that's something you don't see every day." He opened the door for me, the smell of freshly roasted coffee greeting me. The bitter aroma filled the air with sour and fruity notes, mingling with the faint scent of various types of wood. Despite the name, there weren't any actual coffins inside, just round tables and small booths with red cushions. "Have you been here before?" I asked, waiting for him to choose a seat. He was rather particular about which table was acceptable to him, and I just went along with the motion. "I found it when I searched for a place to take you. It had some good reviews." I bit my lip to hide my smile. "I appreciate it." After some deliberation, he pointed at a secluded booth in the back. "Can we sit there?" "Of course. I'll grab the seat." "I'll get the coffee." He walked towards the counter, his shoes squeaking on the polished floor. He didn't even have to ask how I took my coffee. He knew exactly how I liked it. I let him order and walked towards the booth he selected. Automatically, I fished some wet wipes from my small bag and cleaned the seat facing the door, knowing he preferred to have a view of who came and went. The lemon-scented napkin left wet streaks on the table, but it would put William at ease when he sat down. That was all that mattered. "One extra black coffee." A mug and saucer clinked together as they hit the table, the scent curling up from the black liquid. Heaven in a cup. "Thank you. I cleaned the table for you," I said, gesturing at the wet wipe. He smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Thank you, Lucinda." "You're welcome." I took a careful sip from my coffee, pleasantly surprised by the scalding temperature. The burned taste of the beans coated my tongue, almost leaving an oily film on my tongue. Once the pain lessened, the other flavours came to life. A sour hint of citrus, a faint hint of chocolate, and it finished with a floral note on the nose. "How pleasant," I remarked, inhaling the intoxicating smell. "Perfect." William looked at me, his eyes boring into mine. I couldn't agree more. I glanced away, unable to meet his eyes. I knew how William felt about me, just like he knew how I felt about him, but it always made me feel a little odd to be the centre of his attention like this. Maybe we should have stayed at home. That way, at least Jester would be there to destroy any intimacy we might otherwise risk sharing. "Lucy, is that you?" My eyes widened as I looked at the source of the voice. I didn't do anything to stop the groan from escaping. The last thing I wanted was to have to deal with William and Derek at the same time. I suspected both of them had feelings for me. All right, I knew William did, but Derek probably did too. Or not even probably. He hadn't hidden the fact he was attracted to me. and he wasn't the kind of man who lusted without some other kind of feelings behind it. Life was about to get messier, even more so than suddenly owning an unplanned blind cat would make it. "Derek, what a pleasant surprise to see you here," William said, politeness filling every word. The worst thing was that it wasn't even fake politeness either. He genuinely was that way. If I'd been able to be half the vampire he was, then maybe I wouldn't have felt the need to have left home already. "Likewise. I didn't think you left the compound." "I don't much. Why don't you join us?" William gestured for the empty seat at our table. I suppressed a groan. Why did the universe hate me? I didn't need this awkward situation. Not when I was already reluctant to admit why it was awkward in the first place. "Let me just grab a tea first, then I will." He flashed both of us a disarming smile. I wasn't sure why I was so nervous about the two of them spending time together. Both were decent men, and both would behave themselves admirably, and yet that was doing nothing to alleviate any of my concerns. The moment he was gone, I threw a look at William. "I don't know what the problem is, Lucy. You said you weren't dating him." He didn't even seem bothered by the concept of me and the other vampire, which was all kinds of conflicting. I should have known this would happen the moment William came to town. Before I could answer, Derek slipped into the spare seat, a cup of tea now firmly placed in front of him. It turned out that British vampires were just as Brits as the native humans were. Next, he'd be asking if there were any biscuits and saying thank you sarcastically when someone queue-jumped. I took a sip of my coffee, urgently wanting to distract myself from the situation at hand. "How are my D's working for you?" he asked me. I spluttered, spraying my drink all over the table in the process. Right. That was Derek officially in my bad books. No one made me waste decent coffee and got away with it. "His D's?" William asked. "His latest invention," I explained hastily. "Which your friend set off when he climbed in my window the other night." A low growl comes from Derek. "Climbed in your window?" "That wasn't how I intended for him to ask for help," William said softly. "No, I guess not. Please make it explicitly clear next time that I expect potential clients to knock on my front door at a reasonable time. I don't want to be losing my pillow to the cat again." Derek snorted. "Jester is already marking his territory then?" I sighed. "Anywhere he isn't wanted, yes." I was just lucky most of my clothes was black already, and I'd ended up visibly covered in cat hair instead of being able to pretend that I wasn't. I was getting all the perks of being a cat owner that I never actually wanted. "Where did the cat come from again?" William asked. "You really didn't send him?" "No. Why would I lie about that?" He cocked his head to the side, looking genuinely confused by the insinuation. "I don't know," I sighed dramatically, and leaned back in my chair. If my mother could see how sloppy I was being, she'd have a fit. This was not the way for a noble vampire to sit, particularly not in public. "You really don't know where it came from?" William asked. "No, I really don't." I pushed a hand over my face and grunted in annoyance. "Was there a note in the box?" Derek asked. "No, though I would admit that I'd been a little preoccupied and not checked quite as thoroughly as I should have done. Partly because every time I thought about it, something else came along and distracted me, like a case." How odd. Anything else?" Derek sat back in his chair and picked up his tea to take a sip. I had to hand it to him. He actually looked like he was interested in whatever was going on. Maybe he'd even be able to help. "A squeaky mouse, but that's it." Are you sure? Yes, Derek tapped his chin. But there was really nothing else. You can always come back with us and look in the box yourself, I suggested, half joking. At least William wouldn't really mind. Not if it made me happy. And finding out where Jester had come from would do just that. Yes, I think that might be the best thing. Maybe I can create some kind of scanner to look at Jester and... Absolutely not, I interrupted. You are not using an untested invention on an innocent animal. I thought he was a devil cat. Derek's smirk was hard to ignore. He is, but that doesn't mean he deserves potentially maiming at your hand. I leaned forward, fixing him with the sternest look I could muster. A hurt look flitted across his face. But maybe Derek's right, William mused. He rested a soothing hand on my lower back. My eyes wanted to close in response to his touch, but we were in public, and I needed to maintain control of myself. Right, how? I couldn't see why they were seeing eye to eye, even if I was glad they were. Maybe there's a clue on Jester himself. Was he wearing a collar? I shook my head, realising that was weird in itself. Something about that cat didn't sit right, and I couldn't put my finger on what. Other than the fact he'd made himself my pet without me actually wanting it. Great. Now I'd have an unwanted cat and 2 men in my house, which was 3 visitors too many. Well, I did want William there, and Derek wasn't the worst. And Jester was growing on me, despite him being a spawn from hell. But none of that was the point. When did I get a say in any of this matter and choose what I wanted? Chapter 8. Meow. Jester greeted me at the door, happily slipping between my legs to roll over William's shoes. With his belly exposed, he invited my fiancée in for a rub and purred loudly as he got what he wanted. Hello, little guy. William scratched the black cat between his ears. Aw, aren't you cute? I see I've been replaced. Again, I said, glaring at Jester. Wasn't he supposed to be my cat? Not that I wanted him, but still. He was living here and I was keeping him fed. Surely he'd feel affection towards me instead of strangers. I think he's just saying hello, Derek quipped in as Jester shuffled along the floor to him. With a satisfied grin, the cat played with his hand as he demanded fuss. Hello again. Again? William echoed, quipping his eyebrow. He didn't seem offended, merely curious, I hoped. I really didn't need the 2 of them to get into a jealous spat. There wasn't anything to be jealous about. So where's the box he came in? Derek asked. I put it in the kitchen, let me get it. A little worried about leaving them alone, I quickly hurried to the kitchen. I knew they'd both behave, but I certainly didn't want either of them to get the wrong idea. I wasn't dating either of them, despite my engagement to William. I'll come with, I heard from behind me. Before I could protest, the both of them squeezed through the door and populated the kitchen with their handsomeness and chests. Where William was tall, Derek was broad. Both were in great shape, but neither worked out. I knew that much. William simply didn't care, and Derek didn't need it. His inventing involved a lot of physical work that kept him chiselled and muscled. I knew that from one summer where he walked around without his shirt. His stomach was one hard, checkered plate of rippled goodness. Lucy? Derek waved his hand in front of my face, snapping me out of my little daydream. My eyes burned as I averted my gaze and pushed the image of Derek out of my mind. That was beyond inappropriate, especially with William standing right next to me. Are you okay? William supplied gently, reaching out to touch my hand. You seem like you were on another planet. Guiltily, I pulled away from him. He was so good to me, and while it was fine making him wait, I was a bitch for fantasizing about another man. Regardless of our actual relationship status, we were engaged to be married. I was promised to him, and I fully intended to keep that promise. "I'm fine," I said, ignoring the hurt flashing through his eyes. Shit. And I couldn't even tell him why I pulled away without hurting him even more. He looked at me, studying me carefully. There was something penetrating about his gaze, like he could see right into my soul. He'd always had that, and usually I liked it. Usually it made me feel understood. Now it just added to the feeling of guilt and confusion. I wasn't interested in Derek, not when I had a fiancé. I loved William, and I wanted to be with him. But having the two of them here at the same time, it was stressing me out. "The box?" Derek asked quietly, breaking the tension between William and me. "Under the counter," I replied, never looking away from my fiancé. I wanted to explain myself, but I wasn't entirely sure what the problem was. I wasn't into Derek, so what was the problem? Unless... was I? I studied the man lurking under the sink, his jeans tightly framing his shit. Well, that was fanging inconvenient. When did that happen? Couldn't I have realised it at a different time when my fiancé wasn't standing next to me? Or just not realised it at all if I could choose? I'd have to bury the knowledge of my attraction for Derek deep under a lot of denial and more denial. "Found it," Derek said, holding up the scruffy cardboard box. His hair was all dishevelled, and it somehow suited him even more. Next to the neat, handsomely suited, picture-perfect William, he was pretty much the opposite. Cheeky, boyish, and pro-tank tops, which really showed off his broad shoulders. Aha! That must be why he wore them. His muscles flexed as he tipped the box upside down. Besides the tornado of newspaper fluff, something clanked as it thudded to the stone floor. "What's that?" I asked, crouching down to hold up a pink collar. "That wasn't there before." "It must have been," Derek chuckled, checking whether there was anything else left behind. "No note, though." "There's writing on the collar," William pointed out, his voice smooth and refined. It always put me at ease. It was a sound I could listen to my entire life, and I hoped I would. Derek crouched down next to me, a whiff of his masculine smell brushing past me. "What's it say?" A little dazed, I stared at him. Did he always smell this good? "Lucinda? Lucy?" The way they both said my name, it sent shivers down my spine. Somehow, William could make my horrible full name sound good, and he didn't even have to try. It was the timbre in his voice, how it always softened when it came to me. But the affection in Derek's voice was unmistakable too. Playful, if that was possible. I looked from one to the other. They were handsome in their own way, incredibly so, and I liked both. How was this happening to me? "Are you sure you're okay?" Derek asked again. "Maybe you need to sit down for a bit," William suggested, caring as always. "I'll put the kettle on." "Let's go to the living room." "Why don't you grab hold of my arm?" the other man suggested, presenting his muscled arm to me. "How about I do that?" my fiancé quickly interjected. He cut in between me and the inventor, quickly taking hold of me. "She's my betrothed after all." "Right," Derek said, a low growl emanating from his voice. "I guess I'll make the tea then." "I don't need assisting," I protested, but William didn't listen. He tightened his grip on my waist, his arm around me rather pleasant. This was actually quite nice, if I was honest. Maybe not the worst thing in the world to be escorted to the sofa. My fiancé dashed around and fluffed up pillows and blankets to make me a comfortable spot. My traitorous heart skipped a beat as he took off his blazer and rolled up the sleeves of his shirt. He didn't often decompress, but when he did, he was just so handsome when he got all homely. "How's that?" he asked, worry flitting across his handsome face. "Perfect." "You look a little pale," he remarked. "I'm a vampire, I'm always pale." A soft chuckle rumbled from deep within his chest. "Paler than usual, Lucinda." "Maybe that's just my new foundation." "You're not wearing any makeup." "How do you know?" I challenged. A little light twinkled in William's eyes. "Because you're far too beautiful to need it." "Flirt?" "Only with you," he said seriously, and I knew he meant it. Guilt welled up in my chest again. Could I seriously say the same? Did I not always flirt back with Derek, even if it was just for a moment or two? My fiancé was so loyal to me, waiting without any complaint for as long as I made him wait. And me? I eyed up my handsome inventor friend whenever I had the chance. What did that make me? "Lucinda?" I averted my gaze and, despite myself, looked in the direction of the kitchen where I could hear Derek humming to himself. William clicked his tongue. "I see. No, it's not. It's fine. Let's not talk about it right now." He cut me off. Before I could say anything, he let go of my hand and sat down in the armchair across of me. His jaw tightened as he crossed his arms sternly. If it wasn't breaking my heart to see him like this, I'd have found it extremely sexy. But this really wasn't the time to have those thoughts. William, my gentle, patient, never even raised his voice William, was mad at me. And even in his anger, he was composed and reserved, which made it even worse. "Am I interrupting?" Derek's little cough stirred the tension as he walked into the living room, a silver tray in his large hands. "Tea is ready." "Thanks." Grateful for the momentary distraction, I quickly reached for the steaming cup and hid my face behind it. This was all going terribly wrong, and I didn't know how to stop it. "Tea, mate?" William gave him a polite nod. "Thank you." "Jester, tea?" Derek asked, grinning at the black cat peeking out from underneath the couch. "Meow." "Just kidding. I brought you a fish." He held up a small tin, waving it in front of the uninterested face of Jester. Before he opened it, he turned to me. "Is it all right to give it to him?" "Yes, go ahead." "Yum, yum, tasty fishies for you, Jester," Derek cooed. "You want some?" "You want some?" "Man, just give him the fish," William snapped, completely out of character for him. His sudden outburst startled the room and brought an awkward silence over all four of us. Well, 3. Jester couldn't care less. He loudly and happily smeckled from the tin of fish, gobbling the sardines as quickly as he could. "So, lovely weather, isn't it?" My poor attempt for conversation hung in the air, unanswered. The only audible noises were the coughs William tried to stifle, the over-enthusiastic stirring of his cup of tea from Derek, and the satisfied purring of Jester. He was one satisfied cat after he got some scratches and a tin of sardines. Spoilt thing. The fishy smell was potent too. Tea, fish, and 2 men who were both on edge. Certainly not what I'd call the perfect gentleman-caller situation. "So, Derek, how is the family?" William asked politely, sipping from his steaming mug. We all knew the tea was way too hot, but he stone-faced Derek while undoubtedly burning his tongue. Not one to throw in the towel, Derek followed suit by taking a big gulp from his own mug. Smoke practically came from his nose and ears as he panted from the burn. But even so, he didn't relent. Instead, he shot a challenging smile at my fiancée. It was on. In unison, the two men downed their scalding cup of tea without ever breaking eye contact with each other. If I didn't know any better, I'd say they were into each other. But of course, this was not what this was. As soon as they emptied their cups, the pair gasped for air to soothe their burning tongues. "Sorry, I dropped something," Derek lied, purely as an excuse to dive under his chair and fan his mouth with his hands. William used an embroidered handkerchief to waft fresh air on his face, looking equally as red as the other man. Bloody British vampires. They were difficult at the best of times, but apparently even worse when they were jealous. This wasn't what I needed. I sighed and turned to my own tea, blowing across the top of it. No way was I falling for the same thing they had. If the tea was too hot, then there was no way I was drinking it. "Will the two of you calm down?" I demanded. "You'll be healed in a matter of minutes, and if not, you can get some blood from the fridge." Thinking of that, I'd have to make sure to increase my order if the two of them were going to keep hanging about. I wondered what their favourite blood type was. I knew William liked B positive, but what about Derek? I shook my head. No, I couldn't be thinking about Derek like that. It wasn't fair to William. While I might not be married to him yet, that didn't do anything to diminish the 100+ years we'd been together. Not that we'd done anything in that time. I'd been tempted, but my mother would quite literally have had a fit if she thought William and I had slept together before the wedding. I wasn't sure why it even mattered. I was an adult, even by vampire terms. I should be able to do with my body what I wanted to. Maybe William thought I'd slated those needs with Derek. The look on his face told me all I needed to know. He certainly suspected that something was going on, even when it wasn't. Jester sauntered out from under the couch and into the middle of the room. He was obviously used to being blind because, other than the eyes, I'd never have been able to tell he couldn't see. Then again, I had no idea how not blind cats acted. Maybe I should look up some cat videos and learn from them. "What were you doing in the cafe?" I asked Derek. "What were you?" he countered. I glanced at William, unsure what the best way to explain this without hurting one of them. "We were on a date," I said softly. "William's just arrived for a visit and we were catching up." At least that was the truth. Ah. Silence hung between us. I had to notice that he still hadn't told me what he'd been doing there either, but I supposed I couldn't ask for too much, especially not when it was William's fault that the three of us were in this oddly awkward situation to begin with. "So, I'm third-wheeling it then?" Derek asked, sitting back in his seat, resting his foot on his knee. The act spread his legs out, making him look bigger than he'd seemed before. I swallowed loudly, hoping that the men's enhanced hearing hadn't picked up on that. The last thing I wanted was them knowing how weirdly I was acting. I barely had enough space in my own head for that. "A third wheel would imply that Lucinda and I were actually in a relationship," William said coolly. My heart sank. Were we not? I might not have said yes to marrying him yet, but that didn't mean I thought we weren't together. "Lucy did just say you were on a date," Derek responded. "I think I'm going to get a drink," I murmured, getting to my feet and stumbling towards the kitchen. I still had no idea what was going on here. Were they vying for my attention? Or was this just a game to determine which of them was actually interested? Why were men so confusing? Lucky for me, the kitchen remained devoid of the creatures. Opening the fridge, I studied the contents, trying to decide what I wanted to drink. I didn't know why I bothered. This situation called for something a lot stronger than blood. or at least blood without anything added. I shut the fridge door and turned to the cupboard next door to it. I searched through it looking for a bottle I hid so my grandmother wouldn't drink it when she thought I wasn't looking. A sweet scent of mead laced with cherries filled my nose. Delicious. I grabbed a glass from the draining board and poured a little into it. I squinted, trying to decide if that was enough. It wasn't. I splashed more in. I didn't drink much, but when I did, it was the good stuff. The mead slipped down my throat, almost as smooth as B-type blood. But I didn't have any of that, so this would have to do. It warmed my stomach. But was it enough to deal with the amount of testosterone in the other room? The answer was probably no, but that didn't mean I could avoid it forever. The two men had clearly decided I was incapable of solving the mystery of the cat without help. How annoying. At least I hadn't told them about the watch too, though in theory William did already, but he hadn't said anything. Maybe he was waiting for me to say something, or maybe he was embarrassed that I hadn't solved it already. No, I couldn't think like that. William had supported me throughout my move into human society, and all the other decisions that seemed crazy to my mother and the other noble vampires. He wouldn't look down on me just because I was having trouble finding a watch. That wasn't his style. Speaking of the mystery of the cat, we seemed to have forgotten about the box during their weird standoff. I rolled my eyes. Men were odd creatures, even more so than a blind cat. I picked up the box, determined to take it back to the audience room I'd left them in. Come hell or holy water, I was going to get to the bottom of where the damned cat had come from and why he'd arrived at my door in the first place. Silence greeted me as I took a small trip back to the room, a little bit of dread settling in my stomach. I shouldn't have left the two of them alone, even if I had needed a drink and a breather. The moment I stepped back into the room, all my fears were answered. The two men sat staring at one another even more intently than they had done during the great tea standoff. I crossed the room and set Jester's box down on the coffee table, retaking my seat and trying not to think too much about the fact I was closer to William than Derek. That was the way it was supposed to be. William was my fiancé. Kind of. I suppose that technically he wasn't. But his ring rested around my neck, which was certainly closer than I was to anything with Derek. "All right, who drank from the wrong blood source?" I asked. Even I hadn't realised my frustration had reached the levels of using my mother's sayings. "He started it," Derek muttered under his breath. I tried not to roll my eyes. This was getting infuriating. "What did you do?" I asked William. "I did nothing." He crossed his arms across his chest, a slightly annoyed look on his face. I hadn't thought William could show this much negative emotion. He was the kind of man who was always able to hide what he was really thinking, especially if it was bad. "Do I need to put one of you on the naughty step?" The words slipped out of my mouth before I thought about them. "Only if you come join me." Derek threw back, a flirty look in his eye. I stifled a giggle, knowing it was better not to respond to his filthy ways. Not if I wanted William's eyes to stay in his head. "Don't you dare," he threatened, a low growl in his voice. Uh-oh. His fangs were out too. That was never a good sign. I'd only ever seen William lose his cool once before, and that was when his cousin had been stood up by one of the noble heirs. The boy had apologised within an hour. It had been truly something to see, but had me very worried for poor Derek's safety right now. "I think that's up to Lucy." William's face darkened again. I stood up, only seconds behind the two men who now seemed to be squaring off against one another and inching closer together. If I wasn't careful, this would end very badly, especially as there were several pieces of furniture in this room that could be turned into easy access stakes, and Grandmother would murder me if any damage came to any of them. "All right, that's enough," I half shouted. "Get out, both of you." They turned to me, dumb looks on their faces as if they couldn't believe what I was saying. To be honest, neither did I. The last thing I'd expected was to be throwing them out of my house, especially when I actually liked both of them and enjoyed spending time with them. What was my life coming to? At this rate, maybe I'd need to go downstairs and talk to Grandmother about all this drama going on. She'd know what to say, even if it was just to pat me on the head and tell me it was all going to be okay. Grandmother was an odd one, part legendary and scary as Fang's vampire, part little old lady who doted on me and looked like the Queen. Confusing, to say the least. "Are you serious?" Derek asked, his eyes wide. "Yes, out." "Lucy, I said out!" I pointed towards the living room door. Derek opened his mouth, no doubt to protest, but seemed to think better of it. Good. I was pissed, and if he said one more thing, I couldn't be held responsible for my actions. He trudged towards the door, sending a longing look in Jester's direction. Ugh. Why had he gone and bonded with the fanging cat? I didn't need the two of them bromancing their way into my heart. "You too," I said to William, my voice low. He blinked a couple of times, clearly not believing what he was hearing. "Lucinda, don't Lucinda me," I warned. "Right now, I need some time to think. There's a key on the dresser by the door. Don't come back for a few hours." I didn't even know if I'd be ready to see him after that time had passed, but I at least had to try. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Thank you. Now, please go." I watched him leave, my heart heavy. How had I gotten myself into this situation? What even was this situation? That was as good a question as any. All the tension left me as I flopped back down onto the sofa, exhausted from standing up for myself. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to chase away the weariness. Jester's box caught my eye, through my fingers. I still hadn't looked inside it. I guess that now was as good a time as any. I pulled it towards me, surprised to hear something rattle at the bottom. Delving in with one of my hands, I pulled out a garish pink collar. I grimaced. "I can see why you didn't want to wear that," I said to Jester, who reappeared from under one of the chairs now the testosterone levels in the room was tolerable once more. Turning it over in my hands, I noticed the engraving on the metal disc. "Sue," I read aloud. "Is this your name?" I waited for the cat to answer. "I swear I am losing it," I muttered to myself. "You don't look like a Sue. I think we'll stick with Jester." He purred and pushed his head against my legs, almost as if he approved of my plan. Chapter 9. If I were a watch, where would I be? I muttered to myself, tapping my chin as I studied the room around me. Well, ideally I'd be around a wrist, or somewhere I could be watched. "Really? This is how you find items?" Jonas asked sarcastically. "Shush! I'm in a character." I crouched around the room. Tick-tock, tick-tock. I love keeping the time. I'm a watch. Tick-tock, tick-tock. "Wow, you're crazy." He sat down on the couch, shaking his head. "It's not here. I've looked everywhere." "Yes, with your eyes. Did you pretend to be a watch?" He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "No, because I'm not crazy. Hey, do you want to find your watch or not?" But... Oh, fine. He let out a long, deliberate breath. Continue. Lucy 1, Jonas 0. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Slowly and meticulously, I shuffled through Jonas's living room, studying it inch by inch. Every plush of dust in the corner, every shriek of the wooden floor, every dark spot and light fleck. I didn't really want to be here, but I couldn't just stop doing my job because I had a little spat with my fiancé. Or, well, not fiancé, as William had felt the need to point out. Between his apologetic glances and Jester's insistent meowing, the house wasn't exactly a quiet, restful place. Not to mention the sporadic but frequent stream of presents that arrived at all hours of the day. All courtesy of Derek, of course. Each time the postman rang the bell, William turned a different shade of red, which was really unlike him. I never pegged him for the jealous or possessive type. "Anything?" Jonas quipped, breaking me out of my ponder. "Nothing yet. It's because of your stupid method," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough I could hear him. Hey, my method isn't stupid. I found many things this way." The tall man glared at me. "Then what's taking you so long? I came to you over a week ago." "I'm not always on the clock," I replied, earning a cocky shrug from him. "And I have a life." Jonas rolled his eyes back into his skull. "Whatever, just hurry up with whatever you need to do. I don't like people in my personal space." I snorted. That was some real irony there. "What?" he hissed. "Nothing. Just be silent and let me concentrate. The more you talk, the longer this'll take." With him huffing in a corner, I focused back on the task at hand. Hand. Clock hand. Now, there was an idea. "Tick-tock, tick-tock," I muttered to myself, stretching out my arms and pretending I was a giant clock. If I was going to understand the ways of the watch, I needed to think big, out of the box. Things just didn't disappear. And if Jonas swore he didn't lose it, then someone had to have taken it. And that someone had to have a reason for it. So if I found the reason, I'd track down the culprit and in turn obtain the watch. "Jonas, what? Can you think of anyone that would have reason or cause to steal your watch?" He shook his head, his expression pained. "No. As you so eloquently pointed out, the watch is worthless." "But not to you. So who else would recognise that value?" "I don't know. Nobody thought it was worth anything. Papa always said I was a fool for wearing anything so trashy." I reached in my pocket and flipped out a small notebook. The pages were wrinkled from being in my pocket so long, and the pen's tip was a little dry. Even so, it was functional and made me look professional, which was all that mattered. Quickly, I scribbled down some words and drew a sketch of the watch, just for good measure. "Besides your old man, anyone else that had any opinions on your watch, positive or negative?" Jonas scratched his head, dishevelling his hair even more. "I don't know. Look, aren't you supposed to be the PI here?" "Yes, a private investigator, not a metal detector." "Ugh." He shuffled off the leather couch, the material shrieking under him. The grey pillows and checkered rug all added to the bleak and impersonal feel of his pad. How a woman ever lived here was beyond me. The place was cold, hard, and characterless, just like the owner. But somehow Jonas and William were friends. And even if my fiancé was acting a bit fangy right now, I'd do anything to help him or someone he cared about. Just as I was about to give up on looking for clues, the man perked up. "Wait, I didn't think twice about it back then, But when I was at the Williamsburg's gala last month, there was a man who asked me a bunch of questions about my watch. I assumed he just wanted to buy one for his wife too or something. Who was he? Well, that's the odd part. I don't know. That is odd. From what I remember, the galas are very exclusive and restricted. I didn't think they'd changed in that aspect, I mused, thinking back to the last event I attended. The one where William was supposed to propose, and didn't. I licked the pen to wet the tip and scribbled some other notes down. 2 leads, 2 cranky old men to question. Brilliant. That would keep me busy for the next week or so. If I hadn't located the watch by then, I might have to throw in the towel and call it a lost cause. That's it? Jonas asked, seemingly preside as I put my jacket back on and started heading for the door. Unless the watch is hidden in your bedside table, then I need to go outside, I deadpanned. Something odd flitted across his face, but I didn't know what that was about, and he smothered it before I could work anything else out. You have checked your bedside table, right? I asked slowly. If there was one thing I'd learned in my years of interacting with people was that no matter if they were human, vampire, or something else entirely, they could be really dumb sometimes, especially when they were worked up about something. Of course! I didn't believe him, probably for good reason, but unfortunately, I couldn't just storm into his bedroom and start searching. He'd probably go all feral on me and decide to cancel my contract. No matter how stupid I found the charge, I needed the job. Especially with William at home moping about Derek's presence, none of which I really wanted or needed. Except the expensive coffee he sent me yesterday. That had been delicious. Anything else? I asked with a raised eyebrow, and an expression that I hoped told him I wasn't about to take any more crap from him. He shook his head. Good, vampire. Clearly he was learning what was actually good for him. I should ask William where he'd picked this one up from. Jonas certainly wasn't his normal type of friend. I didn't wait for him to change his mind and talk about his dead wife for the next 10 minutes. No one needed to hear that, especially not when their own relationship status was in a little bit of disarray. The door slammed shut behind me and I breathed easy for the first time since I'd arrived. Something about Jonas wasn't sitting right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was just how close he claimed he was with his human wife. It wasn't that I thought vampire-human relationships were bad. I was fairly certain they had the same level of relationship goodness or badness as any other. It was more that it took a lot of guts to go up against the norm of vampire society, and he didn't exactly seem the type. Oh well. Love did funny things to people, and he was just proof of that. I guessed I was too. The whole thing with William was odd, and I wasn't about to deny that. I pulled my jacket closer to me, wishing I'd brought a heavier coat to protect me from the rain that had started to fall while I was inside. Great. Even the weather hated me. Miserable, wet, determined to ruin my hair. A sigh escaped my lips. The water had formed a hard sheet of icy ickiness which I didn't want to stay in any longer than I had to. Luckily for me, there was a great coffee shop just down the street. I'd scoped it out when I discovered where Jonas lived. I'd have a feeling I'd need some kind of recovery drink after seeing him. I should never have taken on this job in the first place. But I had something to prove. To myself, to William, to Mother, even to vampire society as a whole. I was not going to be the little blushing vampire girl who pretended to be disgusted by the sight of blood that they wanted me to be. It just didn't fit well with my personality. I pushed through the door, letting go of the collar of my jacket as I stepped into the warmth. This was more like it. I could dry off and wait for the rain to stop. I could even get my tablet out and start working through the very tenuous leads I had. Or look on cheap auction sites for watches that matched Jonas's photo. I wasn't convinced I'd find anything, but at least I could say I'd done something with my day. And avoid the house and the moping vampire within. I thought I was meant to be the mysterious Gothic woman hunting the big house. But if William carried on the way he did, people would start thinking Dracula's handsome cousin had moved in. I ordered a latte and took it to one of the corner tables. The less people I could potentially come into contact with, the better. My setup was both familiar and not. Normally, I use my laptop to work, but when I was on the go, a tablet and detachable keyboard were much more portable. I just hoped this place had Wi-Fi, though it would be backwards of them not to. I settled in to drink my coffee and do some research, blissfully uninterrupted by the doorbell or William's moping. I hadn't appreciated how much I needed my own space until I realised I didn't have any of it. If the two men were going to carry on the way they were, then I'd need to set some ground rules. But that was quite enough thinking about my non-existent love life. I needed to research. The sooner I got this job done, the sooner I could move on to the next one. Hopefully, one that wasn't anywhere near as weird, or dare I say it, boring. It only took 15 minutes for me to track down Jonas's father. Great, I muttered under my breath. Just what I needed. His next appearance was at one of my mother's soirees. A friendly face. A voice I knew and loathed was followed by a man in question sitting down opposite me with a devilish grin on his face. Watson. I injected as much ice into my voice as I could. This wasn't someone I'd hoped to see. I wish you'd call me what? He retorted. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my arms across my chest. Why would I do that? I wouldn't want to imply that I like you. But you do! Like you? I raised an eyebrow. You're the last man on earth I'd use the word like about. Then it's a good job we're both vampires. Where's some garlic when I need some? I muttered darkly. Garlic wouldn't keep me away, unfortunately, I sighed. What do you want? Probably to brag. That was our norm. We ran into each other and he told me all about how much better his life was than mine. And somehow he knew exactly how mine was going. All the time. It was confusing to say the least. You wound me, Lucinda. I growled, leapt to the back of my throat. Don't call me that. Oh, right, sorry. Only dear William is allowed to call you that. I chewed on the inside of my lip, trying not to let his words get to me. How is he? Balls of blue as ever, if your ring finger is anything to go by? That's none of your business, I snapped. I'm a private investigator. Everything is my business, he quipped. Only if it's me you've been paid to investigate. Maybe it is. My blood ran cold. Well, colder than it normally was. I actually had no idea about the temperature of vampire blood other than it was slightly colder than humans. Or maybe it wasn't, and human blood just felt warmer. I didn't really know or care. As long as I could survive, it was all good with me. Your face, he chuckled to himself. Don't worry, Lucinda. It's not you I've been investigating. I've been put on this big case, though. Bigger than any you've ever had. You don't know that, I countered, unfolding my arms. I'm working a very important case right now. The lie slipped out far easier than I really wanted it to, but it was still better than admitting how much I was relying on my family money and not my income from actual jobs. Jonas's missing watch? He shot me a triumphant and condescending look. Sure. How? How did he know? Why was he always in the know about everything? That was just creepy. With a smug grin, he tapped his nose. "That's for me to know and for you to find out. Ha ha." "Ha ha," I echoed, mimicking his stupid laugh. "You know what? I don't care." "I think you do," he replied, flicking a little speck of dust off his lapel. "I know it's hard to accept, but as hard as you work, you'll never be as good a PI as I. Sorry, Luce, that's just how it is. Not everyone can be as marvellous as I am." I rolled my eyes at his obnoxious attitude. This boy was delusional. "I don't care what you think of me or the jobs I work on. Now, if you could, please move. I'm busy." "Oh, but then you can't look at my roguishly handsome face." "That old thing," I retorted, looking up and down as slowly as I could. "The old myths about vampires must be true, because you clearly didn't see yourself in the mirror." His mouth fell open, and he gasped loudly. "Oh!" My own triumphant smile curled around my lips. I'd rendered him speechless. Now that was an achievement in its own. Before I could celebrate, a smirk erased his offence as he clacked his tongue. "I know. Are you a mirror? Because I can see myself in you." "Don't flirt with me. It's not going to work." "Why not? Dear old William surely isn't cashing in. And you need a man to keep you warm at night, don't you?" "I'm perfectly capable of keeping myself warm, thank you very much." "Are you sure?" He walked his fingers across the wooden table, closer and closer to my notebook. "I'm sure we can put this tension to good use." "I don't think so." Watson shrugged as he smoothed out his lapel. "When you grow bored with that posh wimp and want a real man, you know where to find me." I held up my fist and dramatically wound up my middle finger. "Fang you." His mouth curled into a devious grin. "With pleasure, Luce. With pleasure." "I got to go. I have important things to find, yeah?" The pompous twat strolled off, looking rather smug with himself. Without a care in the world, he tipped his hat to the barista and left the cafe without buying anything. Tosser. Yuck! A shiver ran down my spine in disgust. I really wished he stopped popping up in random places just to brag about how much more successful he was. Granted, I didn't get the most interesting clients or jobs, but this wasn't a competition. I didn't even need to work, but I chose to. I enjoyed having somewhere to go and something to do. And there was nothing as thrilling and intriguing as following the clues to where they lead me. Although this time that brought me towards one of Mother's unbearable soirees deep within posh vampire society. I avoided those like the plague, but unfortunately I couldn't ignore the clues, which meant I needed a dress and a date. Chapter 10. My keys jingled as I pressed them into the lock. A happy sound. Home, where there were no Jonases or Watsons. Well, there better not be. I hooked my jacket on the coat stand and threw my bag under it. Without looking properly, I stumbled through the hallway towards the living room. Bang! For Fang's sake! I shouted as I stumbled into a pile of boxes and tripped down on the rug. Footsteps sounded as someone ran towards me. "Lucinda?" "Over here." William hurried into the hallway, panic across his handsome features. "Are you all right? Where's the danger?" "No danger, just mess." "What's with all the cardboard boxes?" His face turned sour. "Oh, right, that. I hoped you'd tell me what's with all the gifts." I groaned. No, not more gifts from Derek.
Oh, yes. There are more in the living room. The doorbell has been ringing all day.
I followed his gaze and sniggered softly. Is that why the doorbell was laying on the top of the dresser?
He grimaced sheepishly. It was driving me crazy.
I see.
Here, let me help you up, he offered.
My chest tightened. He was mad and annoyed with me. I knew he was. And yet he remained polite, helpful, respectful. He was a perfect man, and my stupid pride had caused him to be hurt. His hand wrapped around my waist as he pulled me up, as he pulled me off the floor. I was catapulted into him. I thudded against his hard chest, invited into his familiar scent and touch. My breath hitched in my throat. My heart skipped a beat.
Hey,
he said. His voice softened. Hi, I whispered back, my cheeks flaming hot from the close proximity to my fiancé. We'd known each other all these years, and while we weren't strangers to each other's touch, it was still new, foreign, exciting. The air crackled with anticipation as I pressed myself up on my toes. I wanted to be closer to him, impossibly closer. His eyes were filled with such devotion and love. I could see his affection for me shimmering in them like shells in a crystal river. He was handsome, so handsome, it made my heart ache. His eyelashes luscious, his nose strong, his lips red. They were calling for me, calling to be kissed.
Lucinda,
he asked, the confession hitching his breath.
William? I thought we agreed to wait,
he murmured, yet his hands snuck around my waist and pulled me tight into him, like he never wanted to let me go. We did, but right now, I'm not so sure why, I admitted, staring up at his mouth. His fangs elongated, stronger and sharper than most. One of the only features that separated the nobles from the common vampires these days.
Me either,
he responded softly, his breath warm on my skin. As his head dipped towards mine, I laced my arms around his neck and threaded my fingers in the back of his hair. The intimacy made my head spin and my blood boil. There was just one thought racing through my mind, one word, one feeling. William. 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 My eyes flitted back to his lips until I tore them away. I couldn't let myself be distracted by him, especially not when I knew he was mad at me. Though from the softness in his gaze and the gentle feel of his touch against me, he couldn't be as angry as he was trying to pretend. I closed my eyes as I felt him lean in. Maybe this time he'd kiss me properly. We'd shared a few kisses over the years, but nothing that lasted longer than 10 seconds. I was ready for more, even if I'd never been able to outright tell him that. It was a confusing situation to be in. His breath hit my lips, only adding to the anticipation. We were so close I could almost taste his kiss, and I really did want it. So much. A loud pounding ruined the moment, and my eyes snapped open to discover a scowling William just inches away from my face.
If that's one more present,
then what? I demanded, almost daring him to finish what I knew was an empty threat. He wouldn't do anything to Derek, and not just because he didn't like getting his hands dirty. He growled. I'd never seen him this worked up before, and I wasn't convinced I liked it.
Are you going to find out what your secret admirer wants now?
The bitterness in his voice is a surprise that I didn't know how to deal with. It can't be a secret if we all know who it is, I muttered, as I extracted myself from his arms, no longer feeling quite as connected to him as I had before. The banging continued. "All right, I'm coming," I shouted. Derek had a lot of fanging answers for right now. I pulled it open, ready to lay into whoever was on the other side and send presents back to Derek. Then again, Anne Boleyn had done that to Henry VIII, and she'd ended up with no head. Maybe not my best idea then. "Madame Confronting?" A mousy man stood at the door, looking very human in nature. He smelled it too. Great. That meant I needed to be nicer to him. "Do I look like a madam?" I asked sourly. How dare he? I might be 126, but I didn't look a day over 20. 25 at the very most. One of the many perks of being a vampire. I'm sorry," he stammered. I sighed. "No, I apologise. It's been one of those days. What can I do for you?" I forced my best fake smile on, which said something. My fake smiles were some of the best. I'd learned the skill to stop my mother from being all mother-like on me. "I was asked to deliver this." The man held out an envelope with a gold embossed crest on it. My smile got faker. The only thing worse than Derek was the aforementioned mother, and it seemed she was summoning me. I didn't like being summoned. "Thank you," I lied, before slamming the door shut and turning to find a thunderous-looking William standing exactly where I'd left him. "Just spit it out," I ordered him.
"What's he giving you this time?"
There's a slight sharpness in his tone, but nothing as bad as I expected. "He hasn't given me anything." "But what would it matter if he did?" I threw back. "I'm allowed to get presents, you know."
"Of course you are. But this is hardly what I call reasonable."
He waved his hand to indicate all the unopened boxes. I didn't even know what was in them yet. And while part of me was intrigued, the excitement was completely ruined by the stink he was making. He was acting like a child whose favourite blood zippy cup had been taken away from him. "So? No amount of presents from someone else gives you the right to act like a fanging arse." I was shaking with fury, but my voice came out a lot softer than I expected. A lot softer than he deserved, too. Yes? You?
I don't know what to say."
"How about something like, 'Sorry, Lucy, I didn't mean to get my blood clotted over someone sending you unsolicited presents. I'll be nicer about it from now on.' At least, I think that's a good start," I suggested. He pursed his lips, clearly not at all impressed by what I'd said. A little part of me didn't blame him for that. My comments were just as hurtful as the way he was acting, but apparently that didn't stop either of us from lashing out. "Let me set your worries to rest. That wasn't a present from Derek. It was a summons from my mother. I'm sure yours will follow the moment she realises you're here." And wasn't that the truth? I could have sworn Mother had a sixth sense for when William and I were together. Or maybe she just had a tracking advice in him. I wouldn't put it past her. Whatever the reason, I almost knew I had a phone call from her tomorrow. A large part of me wished I could just ignore her. But I knew that would only make it worse. She was impossible to deal with. The worst part was that I'd almost mustered up the courage to invite myself so I could speak to Jonas's father. Being summoned while I already decided to go just made it worse. Only Mother. I snorted humorlessly at the golden invitation. Why did she use branded envelopes? Nobody cared about the crest. It was just to show off and look pretentious.
"Are you okay?"
William asked, his voice softer than before.
"I know how much you dislike the soirees."
"Yes, I'm fine," I lied. He might feel okay setting our differences aside to unite against Mother, but I wasn't going to let it slide that easily. "Actually, the invitation is right on time. I was already planning on going." He couldn't mask the surprise on his face.
"You were? But you hate—"
"Yeah, well, I have my reasons. And I was even going to ask you to be my date, William, I stressed, glaring at him. But, in hindsight, maybe I'll go on my fangin' own. Before he could reply, I turned on my heels and stormed towards the stairs. I wasn't in any mood to deal with the endless gifts from Derek, and I didn't want to spend more time with my fiancé either. I'm going to bed.
It's the middle of the day,
William asked, sounding a little flabbergasted. Great! You've made me a stereotype, William Williamsborough III. I hope you're happy now, I exclaimed, storming extra loud to accentuate my departure. I knew that was uncalled for, but I couldn't stop myself. Good night. Two could play the childish game. Just before I slammed my bedroom door shut, his voice sounded.
Sleep well, my stereotype,
he called, his tone filled with bemusement. I said good night, I shouted back, trying to be stern and failing miserably. Only he could make me smile during an argument. Damn handsome vampire. I plonked down on my bed and reached underneath the nightstand for my journal. Even though it wasn't night yet, it was good to note down the events of the day and write down the date of Mother's evening. Just the thought of it made me roll my eyes. A night pretending I was posh, shaking the hands of old bats, and eating miserable hors d'oeuvres without an actual meal following. And the worst part? I didn't have a dress or a date. Mother was going to have a field day ripping into me. Lovely.
Chapter 11.
Lucinda. I dipped my head in polite curtsy. William. His smile curled around his lips as he extended his arm to help me down the stairs.
You look beautiful.
You look quite dapper yourself, I noted, raking my eyes over his body. He looked incredibly smart in his suit. Tall, handsome, unmistakably stylish.
Thank you, my lady.
He escorted me to the front door, his eyes never leaving mine.
The limousine is waiting.
Do we have to? Can't we just take a cab? I spluttered. Mother would die of embarrassment, but it would be my petty pleasure. My fiancé shot me a stern but sexy look.
No.
Fine. As he pulled the door open, a warm evening breeze greeted me. The scent of autumn danced into the house, inviting me out into the early evening.
After you.
William's manners couldn't be drilled out of him, even if he wanted to. Not that I minded. I always felt special on his arm, and to him, I was. Thank you. I descended down the steps of the porch and onto the street where the dark limo was waiting. The metallic coating shimmered in the hue of the dimmed streetlights, and with the soft chirping of birds, it was the perfect evening. I inhaled the fresh air, embracing the night. As much as I hated the stereotypes surrounding vampires, I did love the darkness. The car door clicked as William pulled it open for me. As much as he'd try and deny it, he was old-fashioned in his manners, but I didn't mind. Him opening doors for me and taking my coat didn't make me less of an independent woman.
The Confronting manor, please.
The driver nodded and tapped his hat as he started the car. The manor was so well known with the limo companies in town, we didn't even need to give him an address. Now that was embarrassing. The limo hummed to life, and as soon as the gravel allowed, it set into motion.
Are you sure this is not a date?
William asked cheekily, turning to face me, his eyes shimmering brightly in amusement. It's not, I chuckled, elbowing him softly.
Could have fooled me, Lucinda, he teased.
As his words left his mouth, his expression changed, almost as if he reminded himself of something.
At least you're not going with Derek.
My hand balled into fists as something deep within me flared up in annoyance. I should have taken the high road and kept silent, but I just couldn't. Derek was busy. William's face turned sour.
You actually asked him to accompany you.
And so what if I did?
He's a commoner.
I clacked my tongue. Wow. I didn't realise you were coming too, William Senior.
Hey,
my fiancé glared at me.
I'm nothing like my father.
You sound exactly like him. I leaned towards the driver. Stop the car. I've decided to walk. My fiancé rolled his eyes out of his head.
Oh, don't be a child. Driver, keep going, we'll be late.
Don't tell me what to do.
Then stop dating men behind my back.
Ah, so there it was. Finally. The actual problem and the reason why he'd been so pissy ever since our coffee date. I adjusted the seatbelt and brushed a little fleck of dust from my dark dress. I'm not even going to dignify that with a response.
Because it's true?
My heart contracted as I turned to look at him. Do you really think that lowly of me? Shame flashed through his blue eyes. Do you really think I'd date someone behind your back? And then somehow throw him in your face? Hurt laced through my voice, despite me trying to stay calm. I've been nothing but faithful to you, to our arranged marriage, to our own rules. Yet you accuse me of an affair. William stayed silent for a moment, war raging on his face.
But you like him, I can tell.
So? What if I do? I've never acted on it. Ever. I want to marry you, you idiot. Why would I screw that up? A smile curled around his mouth, lighting up his face and blue eyes.
Did you just accept my
Oh! A blush crept up my neck and to my cheeks. We were supposed to be in a fight, and yet all that tension was just erased by the grin beaming off of his face.
Yes, you did,
he teased, stars twinkling in his irises. No, I didn't. He stifled a chuckle and ran a hand through his hair, messing it up further.
All right, but one day you will.
I shook my head in amusement. Of course I will. That's the point. I do want to marry you, and I wouldn't go behind your back about anything. You're my best friend.
And you're mine.
He took hold of my hand and pressed it against his lips to a tender kiss.
I'm sorry, Lucinda. I shouldn't have assumed.
I relished in his touch, warmed by his gentleness. Apology accepted. And I'm sorry too. I don't know what's going on with Derek or why he's sending all these gifts. Well, I do know why, but I'm not sure how I feel about it yet.
You do like him,
he said softly. I don't know. Yes, no, maybe. I don't know. I've never really thought about it. I'm going to marry you, that's all I know.
Luce, I love you.
My heart skipped a beat. I could count the times he called me Luce on one hand, but whenever he did, my, oh my, it set my heart on fire. I love you too, William. I really do. He locked eyes with me, a serious look carved in his features.
I want to marry you. I want you to be my wife. I long to be your husband, to be your guardian, but I'd never dreamed of being your keeper. If you want to date another man or woman, then do so. Chase what your heart desires. Chase who you desire. Love and be loved. Then return to me, so I can love you too.
William,
I mean it. If you like Derek, then see where that's going. But tell me about it.
I cocked an eyebrow. You want to know about it?
Well, not the details, but yes, why not? I don't need to possess you to love you. And I'd like to believe you can be with someone else and still love me too.
A lump formed in my throat. There was so much trust and hope in his eyes,
It erased any anger or annoyance for him. He was disarmingly honest when it came to it, and it was one of the things I admired about him. I took a deep breath and reached out to touch his face. It's a very generous proposition, but I can't say yes to this. I'm not sure I can reciprocate. I'm not asking you to. My heart belongs to you and only you. But isn't that unfair? He shrugged. Not from where I stand. I get to date multiple people, but you don't. How is that not unfair? Because I don't want to. And you do. We both get what we want. How is that not fair? He reasoned. You and your logic. He kissed the back of my hand again. Just think about it, okay? I nodded, a little overwhelmed. This certainly wasn't how I thought the fight would end. Would he really be okay if I dated Derek? Or would I just be stuck in the testosterone-fueled fight forever? As I mulled it over, the limo drove up to the gates of the Confronting property. The driver turned around and tapped his hat. We've arrived. William looked at me. Ready for tonight? I took a deep breath. No, never ready to see Mother. And all this for a watch. Are you sure it's worth it? He asked. Watson's words echoed in my mind as I gritted my teeth. I wasn't going to give up. No matter how small and insignificant Jonas's request looked to people on the outside, it was important to him. Treasure was in the eye of the beholder, and I was a modern-day treasure hunter. Yes, it's worth it, I said, sitting up straighter. I wouldn't let one snooty wannabe PI get to me. What he thought was irrelevant. I was going to find this watch and bring it back to its owner, no matter what it cost. All right then. I'll try and keep your mother occupied while you talk to the captain. Thank you. Also, I don't have to call Jonas's father the captain, do I? William pulled a face. I recommend you do. He's a bit of a stickler for tradition. Well, what's more traditional than using his name? He didn't come out being a captain, did he? My fiancé shrugged. I've long stopped to question the oddities of nobility. I suppose. Oh, I can't wait for tonight to be over. Chapter 12. The thing I hated most about the people at Mother's soirees was the people themselves. There were just so many of them, all dressed up in their finest formal wear and looking like they'd stepped out of Pride and Prejudice. No, that was unfair. Vampire fashion had moved on from then, but only by about 120 years or so. If a Victorian human walked in the room, they'd only be minorly scandalised. Are you okay? William asked, echoing his earlier sentiments. Never been better, I muttered. He knew how I felt about my mother, and more to the point, he knew how my mother felt about me, probably even better than I did. Whether I liked it or not, I was still a little in denial about that. We don't have to stay long. He rested his hand on the small of my back, a proper gesture which would almost be expected of a man escorting a betrothed into a soiree like this. It isn't quite a formal ball, but that hasn't stopped anyone from dressing in their Sunday best. Or what would have been their Sunday best if they could set foot in a church without shrivelling up like the Wicked Witch of the West. Let's just get this over with. I scanned the room for Mother, knowing that if I didn't say hello to her immediately, I'd feel like a failure of a daughter. Of course, I was going to feel that way anyway, but sometimes it's better to minimise the damage. I spotted her lording over everyone, a goblet of her favourite blood in her hand. At least, I assumed it was blood. It would have been out of character for it not to be. With any luck, she'd already be a little drunk. It would certainly be easier if that was the case. Slipping between the various guests with William following close behind, I tried my best not to let my nerves get the better of me.
Mother? I dropped into a curtsy the moment she was within hearing distance. I'd never hear the end of it if I didn't. Lucinda, what a surprise. It would have been nice if you'd called. You never do. Because I don't want to talk to you. I bit my tongue, not letting my true thoughts escape. I've been busy with work. Still on about that, are you? That's not a real job. Neither was being a socialite, and yet that was what she wanted me to do with my life. Yes, I'm working a case at the moment. Her pursed lips said it all. She really didn't approve of my job choice, or any of my other choices for that matter. It was something I'd almost come to terms with, but still struggled with on down days. It's a good turnout tonight. My attempt at small talk even made me cringe. I see you brought the fiancé with you. Ah, there was the jib at William. I should have known it was coming. Yes, here's my date for the evening. You really should find yourself a better man, dear. William stiffened beside me. William is everything I need. Though the echoes of our conversation in the limo lingered in my mind, they didn't make my words any less true. William was still worthy of my love and affection, just like I was of his. Then why hasn't he married you yet, dear? 126 and still unwed. She clacked her tongue before taking a sip of her blood. I don't think that's any of your business, William said. I sighed. He tried this every couple of decades, and he always got the same response. Mother's withering stare came even faster than I anticipated. Run along, William. I wish to talk to my daughter. A lead weight dropped in my stomach. What could she possibly want from me that William couldn't hear? Whatever it was, it couldn't be good. As much as I didn't want to admit it, his presence when we were around her was one of the only things that kept me sane and not ripping out the throats of any unsuspecting people nearby. I turned to William and reached for his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. I'll be okay, I mouthed, not wanting to even whisper in case Mother was still listening. He hesitated, but then nodded, turning to go into the crowd. I knew he'd be back the moment I needed him. That was the beauty of coming to these things with him. He understood when I needed support and when it was better to disappear into the crowd. What can I do for you, Mother? I asked, trying not to let my frustration show. Did you have to bring him with you? His inability to get you to marry him makes the family look bad. If we're not married, he's not part of the family, I pointed out, very much feeling like William was the lucky one in that situation. You might be right there, dear. I did a double take. Did she just accept I was right? What was the world coming to? Blood? She offered as one of the servers came past. No, thank you. I waved the man away. It wasn't that I didn't like the taste of the SM Bloodries product, but more that I'd rather not drink alcohol-laced blood while at a formal event. It just screamed disaster. Probably for the best. You're putting on weight again. The sting of my nails pressing into the soft skin of my palms cut through the anger starting to build within me. At least I could still centre myself in the face of such derision. Was there anything else? I tapped my foot against the floor, hoping she'd dismiss me. Instead, she took another sip of blood. At least, with every bit she drank, the chances of her getting drunk and leaving me alone increased. I suppose at least William is better than that boy you used to hang out with. What was his name again? I don't remember, I answered, far too quickly to fool anyone. Watson, was it? Oh, he was trouble. He still was. But I didn't think mentioning that to Mother was a good idea. I don't remember, I said instead. He is here tonight. Lady Doris brought him. Goodness knows why. She waved her glass around as if she didn't care that she might spill it. Her dress was the colour of blood, which meant any stains wouldn't show up. Smart thinking on her part. If that's all, Mother, I have someone I want to go find, I said, already turning away from her. My heart pounded in my throat. No matter how many times I did this, each one was scarier than the last. She didn't say anything else as I walked away, and I breathed a sigh of relief as soon as I was back in the crowds. Ha! That was something I'd never thought I'd think. Without looking where I was going, I shuffled through the people knowing William would be waiting for me near the sculpture of the Greek gods. It was where we used to meet as teenagers, when we thought the adults weren't looking. Something hard blocked my path, and I looked up to find Watson smirking at me. No need to fall into me, Lucinda. I thought I told you not to call me that, I growled, pushing myself away from him and straightening myself back up. My apologies. Is Lady Lucinda here, is it not? I narrowed my eyes and glared at him. If he was going to push all my buttons, he was doing a good job of it. If he wasn't, then maybe he should just stay out of my way and stop doing it anyway. Just Lucy will do. Well then, just Lucy. Why don't we go somewhere and talk? There was a twinkle in his eye that I couldn't quite work out. I think Lady Doris wouldn't approve of that, I countered. What is it with all you nobles and your need to use lord and lady all the time? He asked, louder than I was entirely comfortable with. Against my better judgment, I grabbed his wrist and dragged him into one of the alcoves, pulling the curtain shut behind us. I didn't think the private spots were supposed to be used for telling people off. Doris will like this even less. His voice dipped low, almost suggesting a promise of some kind. Not one I was going to take him up on. I already had a fiancé and potentially a Derek. I didn't need anyone else, especially not annoying former childhood best friend Watson. What are you doing here? I hissed. I came to party. He leaned back against the wall, the devilish grin revealing one of his fangs. You do understand the concept of a party, right? You mean an exhausting event to wear uncomfortable clothes to and use the drink as an excuse to flirt with people you're not supposed to. You're the one that's in here with me, instead of out there with dear William. He shrugged, and affected a nonchalant air. My apologies. I forgot my place. Enjoy your fun with the bike of high society. I balled up the curtain in my hand, ready to draw it back and escape from the torment of having to talk to him. This was worse than drinking diseased blood when I thought I was getting the good stuff. Please don't go. The words were soft, almost vulnerable. It reminded me of the Watson I knew as a child, and that was dangerous. Then you need to start talking, I demanded. I'm no one's plaything. And don't I know it, he muttered. Just be careful, all right? What? I shook my head, trying to make sense of his odd warning. I know you're working on Jonas's case. Yes, you made that clear. I crossed my arms and waited for him to hurry up and get to the point, if he had one. For all I knew, this was nothing more than his newest way to torture me. Yes, that seemed likely. How well do you know the man? He asked. Not at all. There was no point lying about that. One question to the right person here and he'd know the truth anyway. He grimaced, but didn't say anything. Just spit it out, what? I demanded. His grimace turned into a smirk, and I realised seconds later what I'd done. Not that I was going to make a deal about it. We were just going to pretend that it hadn't happened. I just think it's bad news, Lucy.
You should be careful. I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself, I bit out. Since when did he even care? I wasn't his friend. That had ended the moment he'd stopped speaking to me when we were 14. I know you are. Fangs do I know it. But I think there's more going on and I don't want to see you hurt. Thank you for your concern, I responded coldly. I'll take that into account when I'm doing my casework. Now, if that's all... This time, I didn't wait for him to stop me and drew the curtain back in one swift moment. My heart sank. William, I whispered. It's not what you think. He raised an eyebrow as he studied the scene. I see you're already making yourself comfortable then, he quipped, his voice a lot lighter than I expected. Watson Xavier Smith, pleased to meet you, Watt said, stepping forward and extending his hand. Without even deeming him worthy of a look, William dismissed him. I know who you are. I don't believe we've formally met, my childhood friend now nemesis said. A darkness flashed through my fiancé's eyes as he bore his gaze into Watt. Believe me, you don't want to. An air of danger surrounded my gentle William, adding a palpable tension to the atmosphere. I gulped a lump in my throat down, even though I knew he'd never addressed me with such coldness. He didn't even really mean it. It was just one of the things he inherited from his father. Unlike him, William knew how and when to use it. Watson shot a nervous look at me, one eye twitching slightly. Don't look at her. Look at me. The two men were caught in a testosterone-fueled standoff, something William seemed to be getting quite good at. For a moment, the tense silence hung between the two of them. A low growl rumbled, but I couldn't tell from who it was. Just as I feared that my fiancé would make Watt a head shorter, the two burst out in laughter. Oh man, this never gets old. Watson chuckled, slapping William on the back jovially. Good to see you, Watson. Huh? What was this? They knew each other? Well, I knew they knew each other. I just didn't realise they were on a first-name basis. More so, they seemed friendly. Why were they friendly? It's been a while. Where have you been? Watt asked as he tapped his head. Any vulnerability was long gone and made place for his cheeky, cocky attitude. My fiancé ran his hand through his hair. I had some business to attend to. Ah, I see. Whoa! Time out, I interjected, making the gesture. You two know each other? Yes, we play golf together, William replied. I turned to Watson. You golf? He flexed his biceps as he took a typical pitching position. Just on the weekends. I frowned. Why? You hate golf? I developed a taste for it. William let out a deep chuckle. He's rather good at it too. Annoyance coursed through me as I glared at my fiancé. Hold up. Why did you never tell me you golf with Watson? The man pulled a guilty face. I thought it would make you uncomfortable, and it's not a big deal. It would have been if you didn't just make a big stink about me seeing guys behind your back. What would you call this? I gestured to the two of them. They seemed thick as thieves, which was something I'd never have expected. Growing up, Watson always hated William and everything he stood for. Wait, you're seeing guys behind Will's back? Watt pulled a face, but I couldn't figure out if he was hurt or just amused. No, I'm not, I corrected. But apparently William is seeing my childhood friend behind my back. I think I was a bit more than just a childhood friend, the cheeky devil said, wagging his eyebrows as he suggested there was more between us than an innocent kiss when we were 6. No, you weren't. Yes, I was. No, you weren't. William tapped his chin. From what I heard, he'd say he was. My eyes widened at his response. Really? You're going to agree with him? Over me? Wow. Okay, well, this clearly has nothing to do with me. I'm just going to step away so you two can enjoy your bromance. I pulled the curtain open, ready to get back to mingling. Wait! The two shouted. They each grabbed an arm and pulled me back in the alcove. Chapter 13. What? I huffed, glaring at the two faces hovering above me. How were those two friends when they were nothing alike? William grew up as a privileged and sheltered boy to one of the most powerful noble families. Watson was as common as it got. Where my fiancé was polished and brushed, my childhood friend was scruffy and rough around the edges. I wasn't sure what William looked like without a suit, and he wore them with such confidence. I could be convinced suits were invented just for him. Even if Watt looked handsome in his, the suit was wearing him. Light and dark, day and night. The two couldn't be more different, and yet they held the same mischievous twinkle in their eyes. Their lips were curled up in a similar smirk, one that told me they were up to no good. What? I sighed, admiring how they were each handsome in their own way. My childhood was laced with Watt's green eyes. My adult life intertwined with William's soft and melodic voice. You're not mad at us, right? William asked, his features softening as he captured me in his gaze. My previous annoyance melted away as I pressed myself into him. His embrace was comforting, his touch welcoming. He was my rock in the ocean, my safety in the sea. I could never stay mad at him for too long. I'm not mad at you, I whispered, reaching up to touch his face. Good. Good, Watson chirped, a beat too high. I am mad at you, I pointed out, furrowing my brows to glare at him. What? Why? What did I do? I pressed myself harder into William, finding strength in his presence. You meddled in my PI affairs. My fiancé's chuckle rumbled through his chest and vibrated my head that rested against it. Oh dear, he said. Never meddle in Lucinda's business, Watson. My childhood friend held up his hands. Fine, but as I recall, you used to like working together. Remember our Holmes adventure when we were young? The mystery of the missing scarf, the forbidden house, the ghost of the porch. I bit my lip as the memories washed over me. Even if it was a long time ago, they were crystal clear. The ridiculous hats we wore, the array of sticks and brushes that served as our utensils, and the laughter. There wasn't a memory without Watt's sniggering and my own giggling. Everything was perfect, until grandmother skipped mother as her successor and made me her heir. Then everything changed. Gone were the days of playing outside on the streets or staying up late to look at the stars. It wasn't proper, and that was all Mother cared about. After some time, he stopped coming by, and I stopped rebelling. And now, more than 100 years later, things were different. I don't recall, I lied, pushing the old memories away. That was then, and this was now. Sure you do. I twisted in William's arms and burrowed my face into his suit. No, I don't. Liar, liar, veins on fire, Watt sang. You had a journal where you noted down your findings and a cigar made out of clay. You carried it everywhere. It drove your mother crazy. My fiancé chuckled. You had a cigar? No, I didn't, I argued, my cheeks heating up. It was a pipe. Ha! So you do remember, Watson exclaimed. I had no idea what the right way to respond to Watson was. I thought about our past a lot. Maybe not him per se, but the fun we had. It was his fault I'd become a private investigator. Not that I was going to tell him that. I could almost see the smug expression on his face if I did.
he'd be even more insufferable than he was the rest of the time. Something I really wasn't ready for. Detective Lucinda Confronting and her sidekick, Dr. Watson, Watson said, with a smile. You let her make you the sidekick? William's chuckle vibrated his entire body, sending a small thrill through me. I had no choice, Watson shrugged. Sherlock Holmes had his own Watson. She found it hilarious and started insisting I was her sidekick for solving the mysteries of the missing petunias. I couldn't say no. Did you discover what happened to them? William asked, not doing a good job at hiding his amusement. Mother had ordered the gardener to remove them, I muttered, hating her even more in that moment than I had when I discovered the truth. That isn't what we told ourselves at the time, though, Watson put in. It wasn't anywhere near dramatic enough. Lucy insisted that it was all some kind of plot to remove anything pretty from the gardens. Is that why petunias are your favourite flower? William asked, looking down at me with so much affection in his eyes. It took all my strength not to look at Watson. That story was only part of the reason petunias were my favourite, and I wasn't sure how William would respond to learning the rest of it. You still like petunias the most? Watson put in. Yes, I answered softly, still thinking of the 13-year-old Watson who'd climbed in my window and left a small plant on my dresser. Huh, I'd never have thought that. There was a hint of hurt in his voice, but I didn't understand why. So, where do we go from here? I asked, diverting the conversation away from anything that could cause more friction between William and I. As far as I was concerned, we'd dealt with our argument for the year, and it would be 12 months until we fought again. Maybe that was idealistic of me, but it was something to cling on to. You could come golfing with us, William suggested. I snorted. I don't think the golfing green is ready to deal with my poise and grace. Watson chuckled deeply. She has a point there. But I do suggest we leave the alcove before we're discovered and cause a scandal. Is it really that bad to be caught with two men? Watson asked, the twinkle back in his eye. He was blowing hot and cold faster than a hairdryer on speed. I couldn't make any sense of it. Have you met my mother? I drawled. It strikes me as the kind of thing she'd be oddly proud of you for it, William suggested. You might be right there, I admitted. But then again, I'm the one doing it. That's automatic disapproval right there. It sounds like she hasn't changed one bit, Watson muttered darkly. If anything, she's gotten worse over the years, William told him. I wouldn't have thought that possible, but then I've met Lady Confronting. Wait, are you two bonding over frustrations at my mother? I asked, stepping out of William's arms so I could look between the two of them. The curtain brushed against my back, reminding me just how close we were to the rest of the people at Mother's soiree, and that we really shouldn't be caught here. I needed the doors in the Vampire Society to be open to me, not closed because they thought I was doing the dirty with two men at their event. The where of that being the bigger deal. Frustration is a little bit of an understatement. Watson was trying to repress the smile on his face, but was doing a ridiculously bad job of it. He clearly wanted to laugh, but knew better than to let it happen. More like outright hate, and wish she'd leave you alone, William added. William, I scolded. He'd never been so vocal about Mother before, and while I agreed with him, I couldn't have him going around and actually saying it. That would just mean that I had to confront the truth myself. He shrugged. It seems like today is a day for telling the truth. It seems like it. I had no idea what had gotten into him today. William had never been the confrontational type, and yet now he was speaking up. It made no sense. Is this because no one has seen my grandmother in 3 years? I asked him. What? No, of course not.
He glanced away, not fast enough for me to miss the guilt in his eyes. It is, isn't it? You think you're going to announce me as the head of the Confronting family at any moment, and you're freaking out about it, and in turn was staking his claim, so to speak. You realise that's not going to happen any time soon, right? I cut him off, not interested in whatever he was going to say next. And not because I was mad either. At the end of the day, I was my grandmother's official heir. It stood to reason that people would think I was about to take over when she hadn't been seen in so long. Well, your grandmother hasn't been seen in a long time, Watson said. I glared at him. You're not part of this conversation. I'm standing a foot away from you. I think you'll find that I am. I scowled, mostly because he was kind of right. His presence did make it impossible to exclude him. My grandmother is fine. She's just hanging in the basement back home. William frowned as Watson scoffed beside me. Let's guess. She's chilling in a coffin surrounded by bats and only comes out at night. The laughter almost came through in my childhood friend's voice, but it just about managed to keep it under control. Bats make too much of a mess, but yes to the rest of it, I admitted. It was a shame grandmother didn't like bats. Having some around would be fun. Though maybe Jester would spend his time chasing them instead of doing whatever it was cats normally did. Maybe not the best situation. I've never seen her when I've been visiting, William said. That's what happens when she's only comes out at night. And you thought you were a stereotype, he deadpanned. It must be genetic, I threw back. He chuckled softly. You're truly something, Lucinda. Thanks. My cheeks heated up, surely decorated with blushes. Whenever he looked at me like that, with such adoration in his eyes, I always wondered why we weren't married yet. Also, if you want to date Watson, then I'm on board with that. I face-palmed my forehead, and that was why. I'm not dating my childhood best friend, I argued back, ignoring the smug grin appearing on said former friend. Why not, Luce? Watson asked, straightening his tie and stiffening his shoulders. We could solve mysteries together, just like when we were young. I'll let you touch my magnifying glass. No, thanks. You can keep your magnifying glass out of my business, I threw back, fake gagging at the idea of touching what's yuck. Nah. I didn't see him like that. He might have been my friend once, but that was no longer the case. Right now, he was just an annoying rival that kept intruding in my life and bragging about his own achievements. I wouldn't touch his magnifying glass with gloves on. Watson chuckled, his laugh still the same boyish sound as when he was a teenager. Oh, come on. I have a monocle that could use some polishing. You gross! That was enough. I threw the curtain open and stepped out of the alcove, no longer caring who saw us and what they thought. I'd take the rumours over any more crude remarks. With a shallow curtsy, I excused myself. Gentlemen, delightful talk, but unfortunately I have some business to attend to now. Please, try one of the crudities. They're excellent this evening. They're excellent this evening. William pulled a bemused face. Really? No, they're awful. Steer away from all the bites. Not the point. Gentlemen? Without waiting for another remark, I turned on my heels. My dress contoured my dramatic exit, swaying with the beat of my hips as I left William and Watt in the alcove. With me gone, maybe people would think those two were having a secret affair on their own. Now that would be a fun rumour, and it would certainly make Mother dislike the two even more. But I wasn't here for her disapproval. I pulled my phone from a hidden pocket in my dress and studied the picture Jonas sent me of his father. With any luck, he could steer me in the right direction, and I'd be one step closer to closing this case. The sooner I got rid of Jonas, the better. Something wasn't right about that guy. I just knew it. Chapter 14. Hors d'oeuvres? A server asked, presenting a silver tray with slices of raw liver and a questionable-looking pâté. No thanks, I'm not hungry. Are you sure? Mother's voice sounded next to me. Probably for the best. Your dress is already a little tight around the waist. Thanks, Mother. She patted my face with her dry hand, the beady armband clacking loudly. Oh, don't pull that face, darling. It's not good for your wrinkles. Sorry. Why was I apologising for the way my face looked? Say, have you seen... Listen. There's someone I'd like you to meet. He's an acquaintance of Regina, my friend from Bridge. Mother, I'm engaged. No, you're not. You should really stop wearing that ring around your neck. It gives people the wrong impression. It doesn't matter what others think. Mother grasped and clutched her heart. It most certainly does. Hush now. She waved my arguments way as she ushered me through the crowd. Men and women in fancy posh suits and dresses smiled as we passed, all in adoration of Mother. If only any of them knew how she treated me. They wouldn't consider her a role model anymore. She tapped someone on his shoulder, and an old man turned around. His white hair peeked out from underneath his hat, and his bulging gut suggested one too many blood beers. Henry, this is my daughter, Lucy. Lucy? Henry. He's a doctor, very respectable in his field. Lucy, enchantée. The man took hold of my hand and pressed a wet kiss on it. I repressed the shudder running down my spine and wished I hadn't left William and Watson's company. Their bickering was much preferred over Mother's matchmaking. It didn't even make any sense. She was the one that arranged my marriage to William. She didn't even dislike him that much. Henry, nice to meet you. I hope you're having a good time. A splendid time indeed. Your mother throws the best soirees. She's got a real eye for it. Yes, she does, I lied. The old doctor grabbed a cracker from a passing tray and sank his teeth into the goopy liver. Crumbs exploded onto his pristine shirt and into the grooves of his jacket. He moaned, licking his lips and smacking them loudly. Gross. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself, I muttered, looking around for an excuse to walk away. Yes, absolutely, he smacked, grinning happily like a pig in mud. Waiter? He stopped another tray to grab the silver chalice and speedily slurped from the blood. So, Lucy, why don't you come to these events more often? Your mother would really love to see you more frequently. I tightened. Why was he asking me those kind of things? That was none of his business. I have been busy, I said curtly. My, young ladies shouldn't work too much. Better leave that up to the men, huh? I like having my own life. He gobbled down another cracker. The younger generation. Luckily your mother isn't opposed to me spoiling her. Excuse me? She's a woman that needs her luxury, and my, oh my, do I like taking care of her. He grunted as he tried to close his jacket, but there was no way the fabric would reach. Oh well, looks like I've eaten one hors d'oeuvre too many. Well, that's... What do you mean by spoiling my mother? I interrupted, glaring at the fat doctor. Well, I don't like to tell, but after the divorce, your mother and I got to talking. Now, let me tell you, Georgina is one feisty lady, but I like it that way, he chuckled. Divorce? My hand balled into fists, anger tugging on my heart. My parents got divorced? Yes. Now, don't blame your father. He's a good man, but Georgie just needed something more. Well, I held up my hand, similar to how my mother would silence me. If you'll excuse me, I have to find my mother. Oh, well, of course, dear. Without looking back, I stormed away from Henry. So, she wasn't setting me up with him. She wanted me to meet her new lover. After she divorced Dad without telling me. Why did nobody ever tell me things? I charged through the crowd until I saw a glimpse of Mother's red dress. Mother? She turned her head, disapproving at the brim. Don't shout, Lucy. The tone of her voice made me shrink, but it didn't stop the anger raging through me. You and Dad got a divorce. Oh, right. Didn't I tell you? She said, carelessly sipping from her cup as if it didn't matter. No? Oh, sorry, darling. It must have slipped my mind. Overcome with disbelief and annoyance, I was lost for words. How could she not tell me? How could she do this to him? Why hadn't he talked to me about it? Where's Dad now? Mother studied her long fingernails. How would I know? He moved out. Don't ask such stupid questions, Lucy. But, tut-tut, it's a party. Don't spoil it with all your questions. Can't you just behave for once? Speechless, I grabbed a goblet from the passing tray and took a big swig from the blood wine. The metallic and bitter taste was truly terrible, but it was the only type of alcohol served at Mother's soirees, and right now, I really needed it. Anything that helped me cope with Mother. On second thoughts, maybe not. I dropped the goblet back onto a passing tray and tried to ignore the queasy feeling in my stomach. I wasn't sure why I'd never gained a taste for the alcohol-laced blood that was always served. It just felt off to me. Thankfully, William felt the same, which meant I had company in the not drinking club. Why do you have to be so ungrateful all the time? Mother sighed dramatically. Just because I don't want to drink, I frowned. That made no sense. If you're not careful, people might start to think you're pregnant. It would explain the weight gain, at least. Mother! The urge to point out I couldn't be pregnant because that would have involved having sex was high, but I refrained. Quite frankly, it was none of her business. Though apparently it was now William's. I couldn't believe he suggested I should date Watson. What a ridiculous notion. I'm just telling you the truth, darling. Someone needs to. I rolled my eyes. You still haven't explained why you thought it was a good idea to not tell me about the divorce until I was at the party. That's because you never called, dear. If you did, maybe I'd tell you about important things in my life. I held back the scowl that wanted to break free. That was the worst part of being around Mother. Despite everything she said and did, a little part of me wanted to abide by her rules and not let anyone see that I'd been bothered by what had been said. Is that everything, dear? She raised an eyebrow. Yes. Oh, good. I need to spend my time with people who actually matter. She turned away before I could even think to respond. No doubt I'd think up the perfect retort when I was trying to fall asleep later. Thanks for nothing, Mother, I muttered. At least I could go back to my task of finding Jonas's father, a man apparently known as the Captain. What a stupid name. A lot of vampires wouldn't take to the water very much. There was too much of a risk of slipping into a bloodlust and slaughtering everyone on board. It had happened a few times in the 1300s. Luckily for us, pirates had taken the blame. A man leaning against the opposite wall looked up from what he was doing and stared right at me. Bingo. That must be the captain right there. I should have guessed from the stupid hat and suit he was wearing.
He stuck out like a sore thumb. I fiddled with the skirt of my dress, being careful not to raise it too far above my feet. Sometimes I preferred full formal ball attire to this odd in-between. A ball gown didn't allow for many ankle-showing accidents. The kind of formal dress I was wearing now did. Though, really, I just wished for the much shorter kind of skirt I was used to wearing out in the human world. Even if that meant having to wear tights, they allowed for a much better amount of movement than this. Sighing, I pushed past the Buchanans, arguing as normal. No doubt Lord Buchanan had engaged in another affair and was being called out on it. The real irony was that his wife was doing the same, and just hiding it better. Maybe William's view on openly dating multiple partners was actually far more enlightened than I thought. "Captain?" I asked as I approached the man I'd seen. He held a finger up to his lips and gestured for me to follow him down the corridor. That seemed ominous, but at least it wasn't another alcove. I glanced around, checking that no one who mattered was watching, and kind of regretting that I'd dismissed William and Watson so easily. I kind of appreciate their backup right now. My heels clacked against the floor despite the fact they weren't very high ones. I refused to wear anything that would turn me into an unnaturally tall giraffe. I was clumsy enough without adding other dangerous things to my wardrobe, and I wouldn't be changing my mind anytime soon, unless Derek could make heels into tiny daggers. That would be kind of cool. "Are you the captain?" I asked once we were away from the main soiree. The man nodded and pulled up the sleeves of his jacket and looking at a watch. One I recognised. "Is that—" He shushed me again, like he knew what I was going to say and didn't want me to voice it out aloud. I didn't say anything. But not because he told me not to, more because I was really confused by the whole situation. Why the fangs would he have taken his son's watch, only to use it so blatantly in front of me? Maybe he didn't realise that I knew Jonas. "Can I have that?" I asked, pointing towards the watch. I wasn't going to lie, this seemed so easy. But if I didn't at least try asking, then I'd never know if it was quite as simple as that. To my surprise, he unstrapped the watch and held it out to me. "Thank you." I took the watch from him gingerly. There were so many things I wanted to ask right now, mostly to do with the purpose behind this all. If Jonas's father had the watch the entire time, then why did he need me to go get it? Or did Jonas not know that his father had been behind all this? Only one thing was certain right now. I had a lot of questions for my client, and if he didn't give me the answers I wanted, then I wasn't going to stop until I got them. No matter my personal feelings about Watson, there had to be something in his warning to me, or he'd never have bothered with it in the first place. That was the thing about Watt. He knew exactly what he was saying 100% of the time. If he didn't mean it, the words wouldn't leave his mouth. I waited for the captain to actually say something about the exchange, but all he did was dip his head and disappear back into the party, leaving me speechless and even more confused. "There you are," William said, relief colouring his tone as he started striding down the corridor. "I've been worried about you." "I've only been gone for 5 minutes," I pointed out, still a little bit dazed. "With your mother about, that's more than enough to start getting worried." I grimaced. He wasn't wrong. She'd once dragged me into another room, stripped my dress away, and started telling me where she thought I needed plastic surgery. It had been both humiliating and completely pointless. "What is that?" He pointed towards my hand. "What I came here for," I said weakly. "Please don't tell me you had to make out with Jonas's father to get it," he chuckled deeply. "No, but why is that funny?" My brows furrowed together, unable to hide my confusion. "He looks like a walrus and a lobster created a love child," William admitted.
I thought it was the walrus and the carpenter, I said absent-mindedly. What? Now it was his turn to look confused. Alice Through the Looking Glass. You never read it? A pang of sadness went through me. Watson would have gotten the reference. It was one of the things we'd done together. Alice hadn't been my favourite, but his rendition of The Walrus and the Carpenter had been unforgettable. I could still picture him waddling around my childhood bedroom while I rolled around in laughter. I shook my head, focusing on my past with what wasn't going to help me. The two of us together were a thing of the past, and I didn't think I was ready to properly change that, even if I had William's go-ahead to do it. That doesn't sound like Jonas's father, though, I said eventually, turning to look at William properly. It does? I've known the man for years. This is Jonas's father. I pulled my phone out of the secret pocket in my dress, dropping the watch in there in the process. A few swipes later, and I found the photo Jonas had given me. This is Jonas's father. I held out my phone to William, but he just shook his head. I'm sorry, Lucinda. I don't know who this man is, but it's definitely not who you think it is. I turned the screen back to me to check I was showing him the right picture. But this is the photo Jonas gave me. William's look said enough. This was not the captain, at least not the real one. But then, what was going on? Why did Jonas give me a wrong picture? Who was he? Why did the man just hand me the watch? So many questions and no answers. But I was going to find out. Chapter 15. I should have asked for Watson's help, but that would involve admitting he was right. And I wasn't about to do that. My pride stopped me, but curiosity brought me here, to the one other man I could ask for help. As soon as I knocked on the heavy steel door, it swung open, and a tight tank top opened the door. Hello. Hey, Derek. Good to see you. Even though vampires didn't need an invitation to cross the threshold, it was polite to wait for permission. That was just good manners. Derek smiled, his muscles rippling under his white tank, with the slightest movements. Come in. Thank you. Carefully I crossed into the garage he called home. I'd been here to pick up new gadgets, but I'd never actually been inside. It didn't disappoint. Rows and rows of shelves with the most bizarre items and inventions. Metal arms, piles of leather, boxes of springs, nuts, bolts, and anything else an inventor could need. A well-used workbench was the centerpiece of the workspace, stained with oil, paint, and varnish. It was a masterpiece in itself. In awe, I let my eyes travel across the multitude of miscellaneous things. There were entire rows of electronic components, an entire vat of old mobile phones, and more old batteries than I'd ever seen in my life. Arrays of light bulbs, buttons, handles, anything I could imagine and more. Wow! This is like one of those Find 20 Items picture game, I joked, running my fingers along the workbench. The wood was both rough and smooth and pleasant to the touch. Derek smiled proudly as he gestured around him. Welcome to the Batcave. This is where the magic happens. Wow, that's not what I expected. This is your home? Yep, he replied, the pride beaming off of his face. I looked around. Where do you even sleep? Oh, there's a small flat in the back. Cool. I touched a brush, enjoying the tickle of the rough bristles. You have so much stuff. Where do you even get all this? Garage sales, car boot markets, outlet discounts, the trash, anywhere and everywhere. I'm always on the lookout for a good find. Aha, I'm not the only treasure hunter here then. He smiled knowingly. No, you're not. What can I do for you today? A lipstick flamethrower? A pickpocket alarm? A miniature laser knife? I'm currently into mini gadgets. I chuckled, shaking my head. He was truly something. His brain never stopped, and I admired, envied the endless stream of ideas. How could one person come up with so many things and never run out? Like a never-ending waterfall, concepts cascaded from him onto his workbench, where he made them into reality. Not all of them turned out as great as he described, but they were all interesting and intriguing in their own way. I'll pass on the flamethrower, but if you're looking for more ideas, knife heels. He snapped his fingers. Knife heels? Amazing. You'd need reinforcement in the heel and a durable but light metal. Stainless steel would be good, but it might not support the actual weight. Maybe titanium? All the ideas. Sounds fun. Go crazy. But that's not really why I'm here. Oh? I reached into my pocket, but halted before I revealed the watch. Can I count on your discretion? Always. I pulled out my notebook and scribbled a note on it. Just for good measure. Huh? You'll see. I placed Jonas's watch on the workbench. I should have brought it to him the moment I acquired it, but instead I waited till the next morning and came here. Something was off. I just knew it. I flipped to a fresh page. Can you make sure it's not recording in any way? Okay. Carefully, Derek took the watch from me and placed it on the workbench. Can you get the lights? Sure. As I walked towards the door to flick off the switch, he pulled his smartphone from his low-hanging jeans and hovered it above the ticking menace. I wasn't sure what he was doing, but I trusted him. An immediate darkness settled on the garage as I turned the light off. Every corner and window was expertly blocked off, and it was pitch black in here. The only light source was the faint glow of his phone. He hummed as he carefully inspected it. Good. Please turn the lights back on. All right? The sudden returning lights hurt my eyes, even if we hadn't been in the dark for very long. Derek rummaged through one of the drawers and pulled out a monocle and a set of miniature tools. With utter concentration, he screwed open the back and placed the entire thing back on a little piece of cloth. As I suspect, no recording device, audio or visual. Oh, good. I breathed a sigh of relief. I could think of no reason why Jonas or someone else would have put a recorder in a watch, but I wasn't about to get caught red-handed snooping. So, what's the deal? Why am I examining a watch? Derek asked sternly, his voice lowered just a bit, falling into a very pleasing register. I couldn't help but lean in, wanting to be closer to the man attached to that voice. I could listen to him talk all day. Lucy? He asked, looking at me in confusion. What are you doing? I stepped away, holding back from presenting myself like a cupcake on his bench. Maybe William was right. Maybe I should ask him out on a date. But how was I supposed to do that? Hi, Derek. Would you like to go out on a date? No? Don't worry. My fiancé suggested it. No, that was ridiculous. I couldn't do that. He wouldn't go for that. Would he? To Lucy. He waved his hand in front of my face, his palm calloused with all the work he did. Sorry, I blushed, pushing the inappropriate thoughts out of my head. Maybe William was okay with it, but I wasn't yet. What's with the secrecy? What am I looking for? I don't know, I admitted honestly. Can you see anything that looks out of place? But be careful. My client can't know I've opened it. Derek ran his hands along his stubble as he examined the watch. The tiny cogs and screws were minuscule in his large hands, and somehow the thick veins in his forearm were really attractive. And not from a blood-drinking perspective either. Those arms looked like they could swoop me up in one go and carry me up the stairs like a princess, all the way to my bedroom. Damn it! My thoughts were wandering again. He tinkered a bit more, and I turned my attention to the various things he had on display. Not because they were particularly interesting, but more because I couldn't handle watching him any longer. If I wasn't careful, I was going to end up drooling over him and making a complete fool of myself. Then he'd never date me. No, that wasn't what I was supposed to be thinking. I didn't need to be dating anyone at this point. You're right. There's something odd about this watch. His voice cut through my thoughts, making me jump. I turned around to find him grinning at me. If you're going to tell me it's not a very good make, I got that already. Oh, no. That would be the most boring thing ever about this watch. And are you going to tell me what's more interesting? I asked, stepping forward and trying not to think too much about the sway of my hips as I moved. A little part of me hoped he was watching. Another really didn't. That depends. On whether you're going to pay me for information rendered. A fake gasp of shock escaped me. And just how do you intend on me doing that? I'm nothing but a humble private investigator. I clutched my hand to my chest, affectioning the best fake weakness I could. Not that I actually wanted him to think I was weak, more because I thought he'd find it funny. I was weird. To my relief, Derek chuckled. How about a cup of coffee? Right now? I'd planned to go to Jonas's straight afterwards, but only if what Derek told me suggested it was safe to. No, Lucy. As a date. I blinked a couple of times as his request sank in. Did you talk to William? I blurted out. He frowned. What's William got to do with any of this? Nothing, never mind. I waved his question away hurriedly. I didn't fancy going into the fact my fiancé had said I could date other people so long as I told him. Even to me, it sounded a little dysfunctional. Or maybe not. I still hadn't decided how I felt about it. Is that a yes or a no? You don't seem very certain. Genuine concern flitted over his face, as if he wasn't sure if he'd genuinely insulted me or not. Sorry, yes, it's a yes. Going with my gut instinct seemed like the best option. Great. How about we have that coffee the morning after the night before? He winked at me, a devilish grin on his face. My blood run cold. Well, colder. Lucy, did I cross a line? Are you okay? He stepped forward, holding his arms out as if to comfort me, but then pulling them away as if thinking better of it. Oh, no, sorry. I shook my head and plastered a smile on my face. Lucy, just drop it, please. I didn't want to talk to him about my lack of sex life just yet. If I went with William's idea, then I knew I needed to at some point, but right now, just felt wrong. Okay, I'm sorry. You don't need to be. I waved his apology away. At the end of the day, his decision was very much on me and not him. He didn't need to apologise for that. The watch has been tampered with. Huh? For some reason, hinting around sex had completely distracted me and I'd forgotten our main topic of conversation. The watch, Lucy. The one you brought me to look at. Oh, sorry, go on? I looked up at him hopefully. Someone's tampered with it. My heart skipped a beat. They have? He nodded. Pretty badly, I think. It looks like it's been done by an amateur, but I can't tell you much more than that, other than the marks where it's been opened. I can't tell what's been changed inside it, which I know doesn't help. It helps a lot, I said, and moved forward, closing the gap between us. I went up on my tiptoes and pressed a kiss to his cheek, feeling a little bolder than I had before. Thank you, Derek. You're welcome. A small blush encroached on his cheeks. That was one of the downsides of being a vampire.
No matter what gender we were, when we blushed, it was incredibly noticeable.
Now, I'm guessing you want me to put it back together again, he teased.
Please, I shot him a winning smile. And if you do, maybe I'll add a croissant to your coffee at breakfast, I joked. Chapter 16. Jonas's neighbourhood wasn't any more welcoming this time I was visiting than before. Maybe it was even worse now I knew he'd actually done some tampering with his watch. Or maybe the captain had. It was hard to tell who was to blame for that one. Whatever the truth was, things were getting more complicated by the second. But I was going to get to the bottom of this. I pressed the buzzer to be let up into Jonas's flat. "Who is it?" His brusque voice answered. "Lucy Correntine, vampire for hire," I chirped back. Apparently, when faced with certain danger, my brain wanted to be happier and more upbeat than ever before. The door beeped, letting me through. I rushed up the stairs, glad my vampire stamina meant I wouldn't be out of breath. I doubted that would have been a good look. Jonas was waiting for me in the doorway of his flat, an expected look on his face. "Did you get it?" "Yes, but you know that, don't you?" I asked, watching for his response. "How could I possibly know whether you'd achieved your task or not?" But I could tell he was unnerved by my question. "I have a few questions about my task." "Your job isn't to ask questions, it's to find the answers." This job had just gotten odder, if I thought that was possible. "Now, if you just hand the watch over, I'll transfer the rest of your fee and a bonus for keeping your mouth shut into your account." I opened my mouth to say what wasn't necessary, but then thought better of it. If he thought he needed to pay me for keeping my mouth shut, then there was definitely something dodgy about all of this. "Here you go." I handed it over to him, hoping that Derek was right, and he wouldn't be able to tell that he had been taken apart an extra time. That didn't help my nerves. "Thank you." He moved to close the door. "Wait, you don't want to know where I found it?" I asked. "No." "Wait, what? Why the fangs wouldn't he want to know when he said it was one of his prized possessions? That made no sense at all." "Now scram! Your service is no longer needed." Before I could reply, he slammed the door in my face and audibly clicked the lock in place. Great. So much for gratitude. How was William friends with him again? Hesitantly, I shuffled back and forth. My assignment was over, but it didn't feel finished. There was more going on and I wanted answers. But snooping, that was a little beneath me. "Lucy, I hire you," I whispered to myself, nodding happily. There, now I was on a new case, and it wasn't snooping anymore. It was investigating. I checked that the hallway was empty again, and rummaged through my small purse. The collapsible glass I carried would be perfect for hearing through the door. With my fingerprint kit, I swiped an imprint from his doorknob and pocketed the sample. That would come in handy if I needed it somehow. A quick swab of the dirt from his doormat, and a hair later, I had everything I needed. It was a good thing I had all these things with me. Perks of the job. With all my evidence neatly tucked away, I pressed my collapsible glass softly against the wooden door and leant my ear on the flat side. "Safely retrieved. Yeah, I know it took a while. It ain't my fault you can't come into a neighbourhood yourself, man. Hey, hang on. Let me open this thing up." Aha. So there was something inside. If only Derek had figured out what, then I didn't have to keep listening. Fucking small screws. I ain't got hands for this shit. Wow. Jonas's language was completely different from just a moment ago. A lot rougher, tougher, and entirely more scary. If it had spoken to me like that, I probably would have maced him. "Yo, it's here. Tell Alpha I got the code. The next shipment can arrive." Goods? Code? What was he doing?
Was he smuggling things? Drugs? Shit. Did he use me as a drug mule? No, Derek didn't find anything. It couldn't be that. But then, what was going on? In my excitement to hear more, I tripped over his mat, and the glass thudded to the ground. The loud clunk cut through the silence of the hallway and echoed against the wall. Shit! Hold up, dog. There's some noise outside. He heard me. As quick as I could, I rushed away. His front door was a lot closer to him than the stairway was to me. If I wasn't fast, I'd be caught, and that seemed very unwise. Just as I pushed through the heavy door and into the dark alcove of the staircase, his cracked open. A strip of light fell on the spot where I'd been standing. Oof, that was close. I shouldn't have stayed so long and risked being caught. That was really reckless of me. With my heart pounding in my ears, I descended down the stairs and waited in the corridor on a different floor. Jonas's window had a view of the front entrance, so if I left now, he'd know I'd stuck around for longer. I'd just have to wait it out and slip away when I thought he was no longer watching. Hopefully, he'd have a short attention span. Lucy, 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 I muttered to myself, scolding me for my own behaviour. I could have gotten into real trouble there. Jonas didn't seem like a guy to mess with, and even if he was William's friend, I didn't want to test his loyalties. That seemed like a dangerous game to play. The afternoon ticked away, and only when evening fell, I dared leave the building. I shouldn't have stayed so long, but I wanted to make sure I'd have the cloak of darkness to hide my presence when I snuck away. Maybe that was overcautious of me, but this didn't seem like a laughing matter. Something was going on and it sounded big, a real mystery, and I was going to unravel it. With my hood tightly pulled around my head, hiding my features, I walked out of the building as calmly as I could muster. Nothing was more suspicious than someone running away. Only when I was far out of sight of Jonas's building, I dared to quicken my pace. As soon as the edge of his neighbourhood came into view, I sprinted towards the safety of the upper city, towards the safety of home. Chapter 17. William? I shouted as the door slammed behind me. It was odd he wasn't waiting in the hall. He normally did. It was like he had some weird sixth sense about when I was coming home. It would be creepy if I didn't find it endearing. No one answered. That was strange. I ventured into the house, aware of the ominous air surrounding me. It was like I knew something wasn't quite right. Hopefully it was just William not answering me. Oh well. I'd lived basically alone for nearly 20 years. It didn't matter if my fiancé had disappeared for a bit. I didn't need him to be comfortable in my own home. I hung my jacket on the coat stand and kicked off the shoes. Jester hissed in response. Oops. I'd forgotten the cat was about and hadn't meant to scare him. Crouching down, I held out my hand and made a weird squeaking noise. Owning a cat was making me weird. If I really owned him, I wasn't completely clear on that. In reality, I suspected that Jester owned me. To my surprise, he actually slinked out from under the cabinet and rubbed his head against my hand. Finally, we seemed to be getting somewhere in the affection side of things too. This I could get on board with. Jester was kind of cute. I never saw that coming when I opened his box. You don't come with conditions, do you? I asked him as I scratched his chin. Jester purred. Maybe I should skip past the men and just focus on cats for the rest of my life. At least that way I won't be considered a stereotype. Jester cocked his head, looking straight into my soul. Or he would, if he had eyes. How he'd lost them was just one of the many mysteries about them. Maybe I should turn Jester into my next assignment rather than working out what Jonas was up to. Yes, I know.
It's supposed to be the male vampires with the harem of brides. At least I'm subverting that stereotype." He nodded, or just happened to bob his head. That seemed more likely. "Where's William?" I asked him, as if he'd somehow have the answer. I was getting crazier by the second if I thought Jester would actually answer me. He didn't do anything other than push himself under my hand once again. "Fine, I'll go find him myself." I stood up, ignoring the protests of the cat. I smoothed down my skirt, noting the large amount of cat hair that covered it. I was never going to have clean clothes ever again. Weirdly, a big part of me was okay with that. My feet padded against the wooden floors as I travelled deeper into the house and towards my room. William definitely wouldn't be there, but I was at a loss for what else to do. I wasn't hungry and it was too early for anything decent on TV. I pushed my bedroom door open, the creaking sound comforting to my ears. Even so, the slightly ominous feeling hadn't disappeared. Maybe I should plug Derek's danger detector back in. Whether I liked it or not, it worked when Jonas had entered my bedroom uninvited. The moment I stepped into the room, I froze. A woman knelt on the floor, her hair so blonde it was almost white flowing down her back and contrasting with the midnight black robes she was wearing. Her skin was almost completely covered, other than her hands, face and neck, the latter of which was framed by the maroon collar of the robes she was wearing. The woman looked up at me, her wide blue eyes boring into mine. There wasn't a hint of personality in them. They were resigned and submissive. "Who are you?" I asked. "My name is Mika, mistress. I'm here to serve you," she answered, her head bowed once more. I know that. It was impossible for me not to. She was wearing the traditional dress of a vampire's blood slave. I might not have had one of my own at any point, but that didn't mean that I didn't know what one looked like. "Where did you come from?" "Master William engaged my services. He said I'm a gift for you." I blinked a couple of times, not quite believing what I was hearing. What the fangs? To be continued. This has been Fangs for Nothing, The Vampire Detective Book 1. Written by Arizona Tape and Laura Greenwood. Narrated by Susan Greenway. Copyright 2019 by Laura Greenwood and Arizona Tape. Production copyright by Laura Greenwood and Arizona Tape.
Audible hopes you have enjoyed this program.